right? We got the key guy. Um, I think that's a huge message in itself, and I will just step back and let Matt work his magic.
Hey, Alex, good to be with you and everyone, and thanks for the invitation to be able to join what is a really, really important topic when you think about all the complexities of companies, environments, and CMMC, managed services, and how the conformance regime of CMMC accommodates deals, incorporates MSPs and CSPs as well into the mix is something that is first and foremost, I'm sure on everyone's mind here, but also something I know that the department continues to spend a lot of time thinking about. And so one of the questions we probably get most often from the ecosystem is, hey, what are the requirements for MSPs within CMMC, and is my MSP, good to go? And and I'll jump right into kind of where that policy issue stands. If you're not familiar with the interim DFARS rule, essentially it says if you're using a cloud provider, which we'll consider MSPs as part of that, even though I know there's distinctions between CSPs and MSPs, but in general, they need to be FedRAMP, moderate or equivalent to meet the requirements of CMMC. And the $64,000 question has always been, okay, well, how are the CMMC assessors going to evaluate and observe and determine if that equivalency is met? And so I think, when the rule makers wrote the rule, they said, okay, this will be good, FedRAMP moderate equivalent. But then, like many things in life, when you actually get down to brass tacks, like, okay, well, if I'm an assessor, how am I actually supposed to determine if the equivalency is met? Because as I think a lot of people know, not everyone can be FedRAMP certified. You need a government sponsor. You need to be in the business of providing cloud services to government agencies, and clearly, a lot of those companies in the defense industrial base utilize those important partners, MSPs or CSPs, who are not in that line of business. And so we're at this kind of inflection point where I think government and industry really needs to continue to have this conversation about what is the way forward for the managed service providers in terms of supporting the defense industrial base. What does the government need to do to understand the nuances, characteristics, business models of MSPs to ensure that whatever policy determinations are made, we're doing so, or the government's doing so with the full knowledge of how MSPs support and the vital role that they play with the defense industrial based companies. And so I do know that very issue of how to determine that FedRAMP equivalency for MSPs or CSPs is being worked at the CIO's office within DoD. There are a whole number. I think you can just think about all the different ways you could try to measure equivalency. I won't get into them because that would be speculation, but I do know it's being worked actively, and I would expect some guidance from the CIO's office to be coming out, relatively soon. I know there's a lot of internal deliberations overall at CMMC, as you know, Alex, and all your viewers know. And I think this will be part of the mix when the department speaks to the way forward, both the long-term permanent program as well as kind of the provisional program that we're in now, that they'll include more guidance on how that FedRAMP moderate equivalency should be determined for MSPs. The other thing I want to say about MSPs and why they're so important when you think about cybersecurity is that you are being targeted. When I go back to my previous job at CISO within DHS, saw firsthand on the daily, intelligence reports how much MSPs are in the crosshairs of our nation state threat actors, like China, for instance. And you can understand why when you think about the role that MSPs play and the access that they have, and that aggregation of all that very valuable proprietary data in many cases that MSPs hold or have access to. You can see why, if I'm a threat actor, if I'm one of the cyber villains, that it would be a target-rich environment to go after MSPs as opposed to single single companies. It's just a much richer target. So I do think when MSPs think about their role in the ecosystem writ large in terms of cybersecurity, it's incumbent upon that sector to understand that they are not kind of passive observers in the nation's cybersecurity efforts. They are an important part of it, and they need to recognize that and view that threat landscape as acutely as they need to be. Just because, given as we've seen just over the past 6 months to a year, of all the activity from ransomware to sabotage of critical infrastructure to the theft of intellectual property. Threat's not going away. There's no turning back. This is the battlefield of the future here in cybersecurity, and they are certainly part of the fight. So I'll stop there and happy to continue the discussion with you, Alex, and take any questions.
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, I just want to encourage the participants to put some questions in the chat. I'm receiving some stuff personally, which is great, and we'll get them out there. But I would encourage people to put them on the general forum so everybody could see it and build upon it. The idea for this is really trying to create a collaborative environment like we see the AB creating with the ecosystem. So I would encourage everybody to push some stuff out there. You did touch on a couple of points that I'd like to revisit because I think they're incredibly important, right? And you're gonna see some of my bias in this. I'll just put that out there to everybody. This is not about government creating some new regulations because some bureaucrat sat there and said, hey, you know what? We haven't put out a new policy in a while, or we need to create a new bureaucracy to employ some new people. It really is because we're targeted. And if you look at the losses and the stuff that goes on, you see a lot of slides from nations like China where their version of the F-35 looks like ours. Their version of the Humvee is almost a replica. And we can go on about that. I think on the SMB side, which we're mostly talking about here, is that about 3 out of every small and medium-sized businesses that gets hit with a cyber attack tends to go out of business within 12 months because they just don't have the resources. And the reputational damage alone that they incur outweighs what we see from the larger guys, right? It's just the way it is. And to your point, MSPs are a target-rich environment because they contain the data of not only one organization, but many. So when you look at it from an attacker's viewpoint, you can commit a lot more resources on that MSP to go out and get higher rewards. I think that's dead on. I'd also think that, you talked about the government, the private-public partnership. We've seen that from the executive order pushed out in May by the Biden administration. We saw that in a letter from Ann Newberg that she put out, the letter from the White House to corporate America. We've seen a greater increase in ISACs, right? So I think those are all excellent points and highlighted for the audience. I'm not going to ask you about schedules because it's not under your control, but we have gotten a lot of questions about FedRAMP and the like, right? Because we have some good OSCs, organizations seeking certification, looking to move forward, and they want to make some decisions. So they need FedRAMP. Do you have a sense of how quickly this is going to move? Is there anything to do in the interim? Is there any interim guidance? Is there anything we could help these folks out with today?
Sure, no, I appreciate the question, Alex. And I should have said this on the upfront. You kind of did it for me, but I'll reiterate. Nothing I say here is on behalf of the Department of Defense, as I know you know, but I'll just say it again. The accreditation body is an independent organization that's the exclusive partner of DoD in supporting the implementation of CMMC. And our main focus is we are the accreditation bites. We accredit those C3POs who will be conducting the assessments, making sure they are doing so to the established standard. We also right now are certifying the individual assessors and instructors and developing that curriculum, facilitating that. That'll eventually get spun off into a separate entity. And we also help manage that marketplace of CMMC and help the department oversee the ecosystem. But to your larger point in terms of how quickly things are going to be moving, I do think we are at the close to the finish line in terms of the internal deliberation that the department has been undertaking in terms of how do we improve the implementation of CMMC. You've heard some of the DoD leadership talk about some of the drivers of what they want to try to make better in terms of cost burden to those small and medium-sized businesses, accessibility of the standard and the clarification of the standard. Where are there areas for reciprocity or non-duplication? Where can companies get credit for things they've already been doing? Scalability, both on how do we get more C3POs into the ecosystem, how do we get more assessors and instructors, how do we instill better confidence in the ecosystem? We play a role there. And so if I'm an MSP, however, and I don't have FedRAMP, and I recognize right now, and I'm not speaking for the government, I certainly don't speak for FedRAMP in terms of, is that really an option for me to become a FedRAMP approved provider? There are no barriers for an MSP, at least to my knowledge, to go ahead and get their own CMMC certification, right? The CMMC certification is open, to the companies who seek that certification. And so if I'm an MSP and I see these the threat landscape in terms of where the world's going and how governments and industry are going to need to manage digital risk, not for the next couple of years, for the next couple of, several decades, it would seem to me that I would want to think about how do I get my MSP up to those same standards that the government has articulated. So if you really think about it in terms of brass tacks, for those DIB companies who have been supporting the department for years and years and years, through the world wars, the Cold War, the Gulf Wars, and now, the department is essentially saying there's another battle that we are engaged upon. There are another threat landscape that we have to adjust how we do business. And what we're telling you is that the information that you hold is very valuable to us, even though it's unclassified. This controlled unclassified information, or even the federal contract information, is important to us as the Department of Defense. And therefore, we need you to do a better job protecting it. So if I'm an MSP and I've got a client base that includes some of these defense industrial based companies, now I would certainly be saying to myself, okay, well, it's important to my clients' clients. Maybe this is important enough to me that I go ahead and join in as well and start getting familiar with the CMMC model and NIST 800-171 and maturity, because and it's not non-trivial to do, right? So I'm not saying that this is something you just wake up and start attaining CMMC certification. But over the long term, if you play in the long game and you look at what those provisions in the CMMC standard are, it really is the basic blocking and tackling of cyber hygiene. Depending what level of the model you're looking at, no one's asking MSPs to invest in quantum computing to protect data. It is some of the very basics. When you look at those 17 CMMC domains, it's access control, it's configuration management, it's incident response, it's personnel security. It's things that I think most people in the industry would recognize as reasonable. So if I'm an MSP, I would certainly give thought to, well, maybe I should just go ahead and pursue CMMC. Now, obviously, given what MSPs do, that could be a little bit trickier to figure out. But at least, when you talk about equivalency, if you're starting to incorporate those CMMC standards and can demonstrate that, well, then you're kind of on the road to equivalency. And by the time the government determines how they're going to judge that, or how they're going to give guidance to the assessors to judge that, you'll be far down the road to be where you need to be.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. There really is, and thank you for it. I think there's some tremendous stuff to highlight. I think that what MSPs and SMBs need to understand is this is really about them protecting their business, not only the government's information, right? Because we talked about before about them going out of business. It also becomes a strategic advantage for them because if they have a CMMC certification, it not only allows them to play in the DoD market, but it makes them a much better decision for non-DoD markets, right? Because they have a higher level of cyber hygiene, which makes them more competitive.
So I think we're seeing that already, Alex, in terms of, we've got 4, soon to be 5 authorized C3 PAOs, out there in the market. And as I've said, they're not yet authorized to conduct assessments, but they're certainly open to engage with defense contractors and DIB companies about getting them scheduled here in the coming months and what have you. And there's been a lot, in the absence of any pilot contracts, there are currently no pilot procurements coming out of the department that have a mandated CMMC requirement. But yet there is significant market interest within the DIB to go ahead and get CMMC certification, because I believe, and I think you were spot on, they see that there's market value, especially in the wake of SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange and Colonial Pipeline, to be able to show on your website that, hey, I am CMMC certified. I have made the investment to protect my data, and as MSP, protect your data. That there is, there's value to that, whether you're a DIB company or a cloud service provider or anyone, because as I said before, there's no turning back. Cybersecurity is not going to be, less threatening. It's just this where we think about the advent of 5G and IoT and autonomous vehicle. I mean, we're putting more and more of how we live our lives, conduct our businesses, run our governments into networks.
Yes.
It's not less, right? So managing digital risk as a strategic imperative over the long term is here to stay, and how companies think about it. And it's it's a long-winded way of saying that it's not a trivial pursuit, both in terms of cost and effort, right? So but it's because it's so important that it's not trivial, right? If there's nothing worthwhile to protect, then the security measures would, not need to be what they are. But because there is such value in what we're trying to protect, that these 17 domains and all of the practices are there. But final point too, and not speaking to MSPs necessarily, but just overall the companies who support DoD, these requirements have been there, are there in the NIST 171, and people are attesting that they're supposed to be doing them. And so if I'm not as sympathetic to companies like, well, I'd have to do this. Well, you should have already been doing this. Again, that's not necessarily the MSPs, but overall to the sector in general.
No, you're absolutely right there. For those of us who have earned our gray hair and actually lost our hair during the process of working in this space, there, to your point, on the actual requirements themselves, there is nothing new. The real difference is the governance structure around it, that we're starting to use third-party assessments and the like. And earlier, during the Q&A call, I think it was earlier this week, time sure flies. I think you made an excellent point that market dynamics are such that as more organizations do this, and there's more players in the market, the ecosystem builds, the cost is going to go down. It's just market dynamics. So we have a situation where the value of doing it goes up and the cost goes down. We are getting a couple of questions here. There's one question in particular people seem to like, and I'll throw it out there. I'm not sure if it's appropriate for you or not, and if it's not, we can push it off. The question is coming up is, why now? What happened? What changed? Because one person referred to it as industrial espionage. Somebody else referred to it as international. But the idea that the loss of our IP and attacks on SMBs and members of the DIB have been going on for a very long time. Why now?
Why now? I would say, the same question. It should have been, 5 to 10 years earlier, right? It's like, I think it got to to use a bit of a trite phrase, a tipping point. I think as we, certainly at CISA, I can't speak for DoD, but even just in the 3 years that I was there at CISA, the number of attacks, especially on ransomware and also on the theft of IP. From when I first started over 3 years to when I left had increased. Just my own anecdotally, I could tell there were just more things we were trying to respond to, sending more teams in the field. So I think there is a level of activity that gets to a point where, okay, what got us here is not going to get us where we need to go in terms of securing our data. Like this is no longer working. Having cybersecurity be something that you, just like any other term and condition in a contract, saying, yep, I've paid my taxes and I use E-Verify and yada, 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 and I do cybersecurity. The threat landscape, the actual number of attacks have now rendered that no longer viable to credibly say we're protecting our data. And so why now? I think it's because as more and more data is digitized and more and more aggressive behavior from those threat actors answers the question. I mean, if you take for China, all the big four, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China kind of have their own areas they seem to focus in. China certainly, both in terms of stealing PII, personal identifiable information, building their own big brother databases for their own, political perseverance of the Communist Party is one track. That's why they break into OPM and to Marriott. They want to know everyone's name, their social, who they affiliate with, where they travel, all those kind of things. And that's a real privacy threat. But on the intellectual property, they, in 2015, they published, Built in China 2025, and they listed those 10 industries that they intended to dominate. And we're 4 years away from that. And their tactics have been very clear, which is to use their skills in computer network intrusion to steal intellectual property. And they've been doing that for quite a while now. And so why now? It's because it's risen to the level where we can no longer ignore it. And the behaviors that we exhibited in trying to defend it by just saying we're doing cybersecurity are no longer sufficient.
Excellent. Yeah. I think the other thing we need to throw in there, because, you're getting the creative juices flowing. I could see it in the chat, and I know it's going on and the wheels turning in my head. But it's not necessarily why now, because it was years ago that the Defense Department started investing in building the model, where really, it took years to develop that model and roll it out, right? Because, the standard phrase, and it's true, is it takes a while to turn a battleship, and the U.S. government may very well be the largest battleship. What am I saying? It is the largest battleship on the planet, right? Maybe the only thing larger would be NATO, but that's more like a fleet instead of a battleship, right? Aircraft carrier would be better. But that's an excellent point. I think you hit on a lot of things there. One thing I did want to mention, a little bit of an advertisement for the future could be that the Chinese, we also know that they're stealing our data not only for intellectual property reasons, but to drive their efforts around artificial intelligence, because these are learning models that you really train the algorithms based on the data, and the more data you have, the more you know, and the more conclusions you can draw. So it's not just about the intellectual property, the data in itself, whether we don't see any meaning to it, will have meaning to algorithms, and that's another reason to protect it. One of the other things that has come up a couple of times, can you talk to the lack of official communications from DoD on what's going on? I know, being a little tighter in the community, I know there's a lot of activity going on, but there's not necessarily official communications. Maybe we can talk to that so people know that there is some deliberate work going on behind the scenes. It's just it hasn't been to the point of pushing out an announcement.
Yeah, I'll certainly speak to that, Alex. And I think I'm trying to make the point on Tuesday evening at our Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
Having been in government, I certainly had firsthand experience of certain initiatives or projects or programs that would kind of linger and flounder and be like, what happened to that? And invariably, someone lost focus, or a kind of inertia, right? The bureaucratic inertia, right? That is not the case here. The department has been in very intense internal deliberations going back to when they first kind of commissioned a quick look back that started on 1 April to look at, okay, what are some of the issues? It's really issue spotting, to my understanding, of what are some of the things we should look at to improve CMMC. And then they took that and kind of self-organized to do a deeper dive and really look at, if we're going to make this thing better, well, then let's invest the time to do it right. And so, to their credit, they've been very active. This is not something that's been on the back burner. There has been a battle rhythm that goes every week. There are meetings and deliberations and briefings. There's been a lot of effort given to this. They have admittedly, or not admittedly, as you've alluded, kind of gone dark on the comms front by design, because this is such an issue, given the stakes within industry, within the defense sector, in the world of misinformation and disinformation. They wanted to keep a close lid to preserve the integrity of the decision-making process and make sure that leadership was given the flexibility to make decisions prior to, hey, here, duty's going to do this, oh, they're going to do that. I mean, some of you may be hearing things, but I think they've done a pretty good job of keeping it close lid. They've said, they haven't stopped us from moving forward. We continue to work with the PMO and trying to get the provisional program up and running while they're taking a longer look, or taking a closer look at the longer permanent program and how to improve that. And so I think it's one of the few examples of the government doing its work and is not leaking. And they're going to be announcing kind of what the conclusions are coming to here pretty soon, I think. And I know it's frustrating. And I know, listen, we're going to have to get our own CMMC certification, and we've made some investments, but not nearly as many as a lot of your partner companies and colleagues. And I recognize that, going back a year and a half, if not more, you have companies that have invested in the people and the consultants and building the capacity and the documentation, but then wondering, well, is this all still going to be, is this all still going to be valid? And I think Deputy Assistant Secretary Salazar was very clear back in May that CMMC is moving forward. We're looking at how to improve it. Cost reduction, scalability, accessibility, trust and confidence, those things. So I frankly tell companies is use this time to begin the planning, right? This is, if you're taking a long-term look at CMMC and then starting the planning to do it just like CMMC is itself, a phased implementation, then you're not going to be scrambling at the last minute when a contract you want to bid on has a CMMC requirement and you figure out that you're not quite ready because you've been, kind of just waiting by the sidelines, waiting for the white smoke out of the Vatican. I mean, I think the white smoke is coming soon. I know the communication has been, dark, but certainly we continue to try to hold conversations and share information. And I think with a little more patience, we'll be getting those answers very shortly.
Yeah, I like that answer on levels. I will say from a personal standpoint, as somebody going through the provisional assessor and provisional instructor program, what I have seen over time is a lot of deliberate efforts to continuously improve the program, make it more efficient, make it more predictable, and create trust and confidence in the system. I have personally seen that, and I agree. I also think the town halls are going a long way, and scheduling that specific Q&A session, I know from a lot of colleagues and people that I interact with, just the idea of having that, I think, did a lot. So I don't see any new questions coming up on a timeline perspective. We have officially a minute. I'm not going to cut you off, but do you have any parting thoughts, suggestions, what have you, to throw out there to the attendees?
Well, first off, Alex, I want to thank you for the invitation, and kudos to the team in putting this event together. I think the more dialogue that we have, the more good questions. To the department's credit, they always envisioned a 5-year implementation. This was always going to be somewhat of a journey of discovery. And so I guess my final point to everyone is, exhale a bit, recognize that the department wants to get this right, and it's going to be tweaked as we go forward. What the world looks like in 2025 in regard to CMMC is probably going to have a lot of big delta between what it looked like when it was first announced, a year and a half, 2 years ago, and recognize, not making light of the investments and the time and frustration that goes into not knowing, but the tide, the current is moving in one direction, which is towards more rigorous and verifiable cybersecurity practices. And so whether it's, as you said up front, to just protect your own business, there's a good reason to implement those practices now. And if you're in the defense sector, then there's even obviously a more mandated reason to do it. But start now. Start the planning. Start having internal conversations with your colleagues in your company, whether you're an MSP or any type of other company that's involved in this ecosystem. Understand what's on your network. What are you trying to protect? Where's COI going to be? What do your clients need to protect in terms of their data? Understand the problem set, and then start getting more familiar with CMMC. And there are plenty of good coaches and trainers and the RPs and RPOs out there to help you with that. And then by the time you do that, I think the DoD will have some updated guidance on where this is all headed in terms of improvements. And then, giddy up, and we're all along for the ride. So again, appreciate the audience here, Alex.
Well, thank you for taking the time. I know you're extremely busy, and it's one of those things. I'm sure you wake up every morning with a new set of. You go to sleep at night with a set of to-dos. You wake up the next morning with an even bigger set of to-dos. But over time, it coalesces down, and we get a really good program with a pretty rich ecosystem, and we guarantee the safety and security of this nation we love, right?
Absolutely. That's the spirit.
Thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
I love that. I thought that was perfect. Thanks for everyone with their comments. I'm also here in the background helping if you need anything. I will make sure that everything goes smoothly. And yes, please do use that hashtag MSS I will now leave the floor for Alex to introduce our next fantastic speaker.
Thank you. Phelim, I think you need to turn over. Maybe you have. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Welcome, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you. So let me give a quick introduction to the audience and a little bit of a plug here. Elizabeth Doherty is from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO. And many of you are probably asking, like, why do we have the USPTO here? Well, it's kind of simple. They are charged with basically, I'm going to put my words around it and let Elizabeth talk to it. They're the ones who provide the legal protection around your patents and trademarks, right? So we're not only worried about somebody coming in and stealing your stuff, but what can we do about it, right? And this is also for further competitive advantage, because you don't want to go out and invest in a lot of innovation and the like, wake up the next morning to find out somebody's doing it after you spent 20 years investing and you have no protection. So that's what the USPTO is all about. I'll turn it over to Elizabeth in a second to kind of give some opening remarks, but I will tell you, having worked with her in the past, her and her team are highly buttoned up. And I know that she actually has some of her folks in the channel. So if you're looking for resources and the like, even if we don't get to it, I can just tell you from past experience, her folks are going to respond to you in the channel without us even discussing it. So feel free. So Elizabeth, why don't you tell us, kind of build that out a little. You can describe your organization and your team and all that far better than I can. I mean, you've forgotten more than I know.
Well, thank you, Alex. It's such a pleasure being here with you today, my fellow speakers and your audience. As Alex said, my name is Elizabeth Doherty, and I currently serve as the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's Eastern Regional Outreach Director, which is really a very long way of saying that my team and I help people. And we help inventors, innovators, and entrepreneurs every day. And it's our pleasure to do so. Our team specifically works with stakeholders on the East Coast, but we have regional offices that are located in Detroit, Denver, Dallas, and San Jose, and they work with innovators across the nation. Um, we're going to cover a lot in our brief 30 minutes together, but the one and most sincere I want you to have as a takeaway is that the USPTO is with you in it together. We are here to support you. We are here to work with you. We want what you want. We want to protect your intellectual property and protect it in such a way that you can take it to the bank and not to the courthouse. It was said in the introduction to Matt's presentation, which, by the way, I really enjoyed and I learned a great deal about. It was said that it's easier to steal than to create. And sadly, in many instances, that is in fact true. Um, and that is why intellectual property is so important. And I want in our conversation today, because I know many attending today are small business owners who are perhaps looking at themselves and thinking, am I creating intellectual property? And if so, what type of intellectual property and how do I protect it? I want to let you know that we are there to help hold your hand, to have those conversations with you. We don't want protecting your intellectual property to be a rainy day project, to be a project that you get to when you have more time, more money, or a better appreciation or understanding of intellectual property. We understand that it's kind of a scary concept, and it's not one that many of us grow up with, but it's one that many of us need to take advantage of, protecting our intellectual property. The USPTO started in 1790 with the first patent law, and it was just this past year that we issued patent number 11 million. So we've been at this a long time, and so have our inventors and remarkable innovators and entrepreneurs. We are so very fortunate that the founding fathers of our country saw intellectual property and its protection being so critical to the success of our nation that they in fact wrote it into the US Constitution. Article 1, Clause 8, Section 8 sets forth that we will protect the creative discoveries and writings of authors and inventors for limited periods of time, to exclude others from making, using, selling, or importing for sale those technologies without permission. So this has been part of the core of our foundation, the foundation of our very nation, and something which, again, works to protect those remarkable individuals and organizations that are creating intellectual property. So Alex, I encourage you to take it away. We can talk about it from whatever angle you'd like. I do want to have the opportunity, and I think it's going to come out in our conversation, to highlight many of the resources that are available to people who are inventing, who are creating small businesses to protect their intellectual property. Things, ways for people to understand better, ways for people to save money doing it, ways for people to get insight and information and direct help. So I think a lot of this will come out in our conversation.
Oh, absolutely. We'll get to that in a bit, because you have a number of programs, including some programs that are designed for small and medium-sized businesses, so they don't have, and MSPs, right? That kind of group.
Certainly,
It's,
certainly,
it's because they don't have the resources of a larger company like an IBM or HP, who is known for turning out tons of patents. Um, I,
certainly.
I I do want to see if I can get a little more engagement from the audience here with a piece of trivia. You mentioned how the IP laws are actually embedded in our Constitution. They are foundational to our country. And it also is one of the ways that makes us unique. But the audience may not know that one and only one US president has a patent. Does anybody in the audience know who that is?
It's one of my favorite questions, Alex. Thank you for weaving that in there.
I'm glad you threw it in. The only thing I'll say is I would say that your folks can't respond.
Of course.
All right, we've only gotten one response so far, and it's Jefferson, Jimmy Carter, Washington, Trump. Um,
Some pretty good guesses in there.
they are some pretty good guesses, because Washington, if I'm not mistaken, actually had trademarks on his whiskey, where he had the oldest
Correct.
whiskey license, but he didn't have a patent. There's
He
actually,
was
what was it?
certainly he was certainly an inventor in his own right, but you are correct. He never sought to patent, just like Jefferson. Jefferson is known for his
Yep.
creative mind and his creation of various technologies that were used there at Monticello, both in his personal and professional life. But you're right, not the
Yep.
one we're looking for.
No, it's. Do you want to tell him or should I? You can go ahead and tell him.
Oh, I see. Stephen Jones just called it out.
Oh, he
It is
got it.
correct. Abraham Lincoln.
Oh.
Abraham Lincoln received the one and only patent to date issued to a US president. And it was, in fact, for a method for lifting boats over shoals. As you can imagine, in the hot summer months, boats on the Mississippi could get caught on sandbars. When the level of the rivers would subside, boats would oftentimes get caught as they're transporting up and down the river. He devised a method for helping to lift these boats over shoals. Now, to our knowledge, the technology was never actually commercially used, yet it's still kind of a fun fact. He was certainly an advocate for the patent system and is known for kind of the remarkable statement that still sits atop one of the doors at the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is the government department which houses the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Abraham Lincoln is quoted with saying that the patent system added the fuel of interest to the fire of genius. And I think that is still true today.
Mhm. Yes, and just for the audience, and Stefan gets credit for guessing Lincoln or knowing Lincoln. But if I'm the last time I looked, his model, Lincoln's model that he built for his patent, was still on display at the Natural History Museum or the Museum of American History at the
Yes,
Smithsonian. You can
the
actually go
National
see
Museum
it.
of American History. In fact, the National Museum of American History, one of our Smithsonian institutions, in fact has a robust collection of approximately 10 to 15,000 historic patent models. So a great place to go and learn about our nation's invention history.
So, if you could for a second, I know we've talked about this a few times, but maybe give some, and you could go on about this for quite some time. Maybe talk about the threats to intellectual property that we're seeing from foreign nations, foreign governments. I know there's a
Certainly,
lot
I'd
there,
be
so maybe you can boil it down to the time we have, and maybe your team can help reference some places where the attendees can learn more about it.
certainly. And I don't hold myself out to be an expert in any fashion on this topic. This is a topic which is really broadly addressed by our Office of Policy and International Affairs. They work closely with a number of other branches within the federal government, including the US State Department, to address threats to intellectual property. We, in fact, I know Matt spoke somewhat about it in his presentation, the rise of intellectual property theft and just the rise of and growth of intellectual property coming out of China itself. Because that is such an area of concern for us as a government, but also concern for our stakeholders, we in fact have a very robust China IP team. And I would draw attention to our website. And of course, our website, www.uspto.gov, is a great first step to learning anything about intellectual property. But we don't want to leave you there. We want to make sure to also connect with you personally. But if you were to go to our website and go to our policy page, you would find we have a China IPR toolkit, China Intellectual Property Rights Toolkit. This is extremely helpful for anyone who is looking to do business with China, who is looking to secure, protect, or perhaps enforce intellectual property in China. Again, our China IP team is created and populated by a series of individuals who have a great wealth of experience in all forms of intellectual property, whether it's patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets. And in fact, I would draw attention to, and I'm sorry, I'm looking to my other screen because I want to be sure and point this out to you, is just in January of this year, we issued an updated report, Trademarks and Patents in China, the impact of non-market factors on filing trends and IP systems. This is one of a few countries that we do this kind of in-depth research on because we know it is of such interest and concern. And I think it's interesting to point out in this report that they set forth something we've already kind of alluded to and touched on. In 2019, relevant authorities in China received 7.8 million trademark applications and 1.5 million utility patent applications, accounting for nearly half of global totals. If you take it that and look at it from a US perspective, on average, the US Patent and Trademark Office receives approximately 650,000 patent applications a year. Compare that against 1.5 million were being received in China. That is just an explosion of technology that
Yep.
they are seeking to patent. They received 7.8 million trademark applications. In this year alone, we are approaching over 700,000 trademark applications in our office. Again, how does one compete against 7.8 million trademark registrations? Now, with that said, there's a lot of concerns as to what's taking place, and these filings are influenced by non-market factors. Non-market factors including subsidies, government mandates, bad faith trademark applications, and defensive countermeasures. While we're talking about China specifically, one thing I'd like to be sure to bring to people's attention as a resource for inventors, innovators, and entrepreneurs is our IP attaché program. And this is really an unsung hero in the federal government. We have what we call our IP attachés located across the globe in 13 countries. In fact, 3 of these IP attachés are in China in various cities. They are there to serve as a resource for American inventors, innovators, and entrepreneurs who are, again, seeking to protect intellectual property in China, looking to enforce intellectual property in China, or looking just to engage with organizations and entities in China that need assistance. And they can do so in a variety of ways. These IP attachés are a combined effort between the USPTO and the US State Department. They are associated with the embassies in those countries and work closely with the embassy. I'll give you one example of an instance where our IP attaché was able to play a really, really value-added role. This is probably a couple of years now ago. Under Armour, a company, an American company housed in Baltimore, Maryland, a company many of us know, love, and appreciate, and in fact buy and use their products. Under Armour discovered that in China, there was a bad actor, and I'll leave it at that, a bad actor who devised a set of stores completely replicating the work of Under Armour. If
Mm-hmm.
one were to walk into these stores, the store looked identical to an Under Armour store. The clothing, the materials, the merchandise being sold was identical to that of Under Armour. Now, was any of it official Under Armour? Was any of it approved Under Armour? Was any of it licensed Under Armour? And the answer is no. This eventually went to the highest court in China, and there was a determination on behalf and in favor of Under Armour against this bad actor. Our IP attaché was able to play a role in helping to navigate that situation, to connect the right resources, and to help move that forward such that there was a successful resolution. So I would call attention again to our IP attaché program. They're located across the globe in a variety of really important marketplaces. So that information is available on our website. Again, our China team is one that's very robust. We do have a number of other country-specific IPR toolkits, but our China one is perhaps the most informative and most frequently kept up to date. Another collaboration between the USPTO and the International Trade Administration, or the ITA, which is also part of the Department of Commerce,
Mm-hmm.
is something called our stopfakes.gov. StopFakes is itself a website, but it's also a team of individuals. They have a number of these intellectual property rights toolkits as well, and offer a number of resources, again, particularly for our small businesses and people who are looking to protect and enforce intellectual property abroad.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So we're not getting a lot of questions, so I would encourage the audience to throw out some more questions. You covered a lot, right? There was a lot of data in there, and I think it shows your passion around it. The same with Matt; he did the same thing. There was a lot in there to unpack, and I'm not even going to try to get all of it, but we'll touch on a few things. Um, One thing I'll point out is that there's enough of this going on. There are actually dedicated units to intellectual property theft from international bad actors within the FBI and Homeland Security, particularly out of critical infrastructure and Homeland Security. So there's enough going on there that has happened. I have personal knowledge. Throw us out to the audience of a company that I dealt with that had intellectual property stolen from them by who we believe is a Chinese, and the Chinese then put forward to get a patent on it and attack the company they stole it from. So this is definitely a business reality that I think doesn't get served well. I like the way you refer to it as a rainy day project. I know for me, 90% of my um, 90% of my projects, just my rainy day projects, I never get to. Right? It's this reality of it. Um, we got a question here I think is pretty interesting. As I work with companies, how can I assist? This is from a consultant.
Sure.
How can she assist them in navigating um, the protection of their IP from nation states?
It's a great question. I appreciate being asked that. In part, I would have her direct them to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Again, our website's a great start, but we love to have one-on-one conversations with our companies. That's something that my team does on a regular basis, as well as the other regional outreach teams. Our information is widely available on the USPTO website, but to actually speak with us about what type of intellectual property portfolio you're developing, how you need to protect that, and again, to have those international conversations as well. Going back to this rainy day project, I think one of the other challenges we face at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is this need to demystify the process and also to clarify, because people have come away with a very mistaken understanding that the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is this black box agency. That they're not able to talk to us, they're not able to interact with us. They throw in an application and then hold their breath and hope for the best. We don't want that to be the experience. We are an agency of nearly 13,000 employees who love to interact with our stakeholders. It's all about communication and collaboration. And we
Yes.
want to be known for that. So we want to engage our stakeholders, whether it's prior to filing a patent application or filing a trademark application, or during the process, or even at the end of the process once you have your intellectual property rights in hand. How can we help you? We know this is a journey, and sometimes the journey is a slog, and sometimes it's painful and it can be expensive. But have a conversation with us to let us help walk you through some of the programs and initiatives that we have available that you may or may not be familiar with, that you may or may not know to take advantage of. Whether it's our reduced fees for small entities, our micro entity filers, whether it's our patent pro bono program or our law school clinic programs, whether it's working with our patent and trademark resource centers who can help you set up a high quality patent or trademark search prior to even filing an application. We have so many resources that are available that, I think we are the best kept secret of the federal government. There's some blessing in that we're not on the front page of the Washington Post every day, but it also, I think, dissuades people from reaching out and asking questions when they should.
So to that point, I need to apologize to Leslie Weinstein, because her question got lost in the. Well, I lost it in the chat. Other people are telling me it's there. My apologies, Leslie. I owe you. She's asking, she's basically saying, do I really need an attorney to get a patent? And how can I afford such a long legal and detailed process? Um, Go for it. I know this is one of your favorite
It
subjects.
is. Well, Leslie, that's a great question. And the answer is no, you're not required by law to use a patent attorney or a patent agent. And let me just specify really quickly. A patent attorney is, as the name suggests, someone who has a recognized degree in one of the sciences, has passed the certification exam with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and has a law degree. A patent agent has all of those things, except they do not have a law degree. They
Hmm.
have a degree in one of the recognized sciences, and they have passed a certification exam with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. You are not required by law to use a patent attorney or a patent agent. But with that said, you are strongly encouraged to do so. Now, I would say on average, about less than 5% of our applicants go the road alone, are what we call our pro se applicants, not using a patent attorney or patent agent. And that is because it is a complex system. We'd be the first to acknowledge that applying for a US patent does have a certain level of complexity. The disclosure has a level of complexity, the format, the requirements have a certain level of complexity. But with that said, I find those individuals who do it successfully without a patent attorney or patent agent are oftentimes those prolific filers, people who've been down the road more than once or maybe more than twice. So my word of suggestion or encouragement would be to use a patent attorney or patent agent, perhaps at least that first or second time. Now, with that said, I appreciate that the costs in filing and prosecuting a patent application are inherently in hiring a patent attorney or patent agent. The cost to the US Patent and Trademark Office is in fact minimal. We are the cheapest intellectual property system in the world. The costs really are attributable to getting that legal assistance. I don't say that to throw our colleagues in the legal profession under the bus, but it is a complex process and it does take time. Now, we do, as a result of the 2011 America Invents Act, have something called a patent pro bono program. Congress at the time did not want under-resourced inventors to leave inventions on the kitchen table or the garage workbench because they could not afford a patent attorney or patent agent. They promoted to the USPTO that in combination with legal organizations across the nation, that we should stand up state or regional intellectual property patent pro bono programs, and we did. We now have coverage across the nation in these patent pro bono programs, and you can find that information on our website, and I'm sure my colleague will put it in the chat as well. Now, to take advantage of these patent pro bono programs, you do have to meet certain criteria because the programs are limited. There's only a certain number of attorneys participating. But just very briefly, you have to be under a certain financial cap. You have to have more than a mere idea, and you have to have some skin in the game. Now, when I say skin in the game, you have to have either filed your own provisional patent application on your own or have completed an online class on our website. You know, a corollary program that we also have is our law school clinic program. And I mention it because sometimes for inventors who make too much to participate in the patent pro bono program, but who are still under-resourced, can take advantage of free or reduced cost legal services through a participating law school where students under the supervision of a registered practitioner, professor, are able to work on your application. So I bring that to people's attention because we want people to use these programs, the patent pro bono program, the law school clinic program. But bottom line, in answer to the question, one is not required to use a patent attorney or patent agent. Most people do.
Excellent, excellent. If I'm not mistaken, the single largest holder of patents in the United States is a florist in Illinois.
You know, that's a very curious fact, and that is true. You know, people always think of Thomas Edison as our most prolific inventor. And yes, he is right up there, but you are correct. You talk about somebody who's inventing to solve everyday challenges, everyday needs. You are correct, in a wide array of floral products.
It's really kind of interesting. I think a lot of people think patents have to be huge and world changing, but they really don't. But it's important to protect them when they're key to your business. Leslie's saying thank you for your
You're welcome,
support.
Leslie.
Do you have any parting thoughts? And then I'm just gonna ask one final question, or maybe I'll ask
I
my question
certainly
first, and
do.
then you give it the
No,
parting
okay,
thought.
please. No, go
Um,
right ahead, Alex.
and this usually comes up, it hasn't come up on this chat. Can you tell us about your office mate?
Oh, is that either the dog on the floor or Mr. Peanut? I'm going to go with Mr. Peanut.
I was going with Mr. Peanut because it seems every time we're on a video, somebody asks about it.
It's true.
Maybe they're too serious this
So
time. I don't know.
you do have a very serious and focused audience, and I applaud them for that. Mr. Peanut is a 1950s advertising costume. He's actually a tribute to my trademark colleagues. I am a patent person by trade, having come to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office 30 years ago with a degree in physics. I was a patent examiner for the first part of my career, examining in the exciting and sexy art of Class 73 electrical mechanical devices that measure or test. I got my law degree. I did legal policy work for 10 years. And now the real pleasure of my career is interacting with audiences such as yours today. And again, meeting with inventors, innovators, and entrepreneurs. There's so much more I could say and I could share, but I certainly want one of the takeaways, as I've said a number of times throughout this program, is that we are here to help and we are here to have those conversations. Again, I would encourage people to visit our website. Visit the USPTO in your region part of our website. That's where you can find state-based
Yep.
resources that are available no matter what your geographic location in the US. Also, feel free to reach out to my team and I. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. If you'd like to set up an appointment and meet with my team, we'd be happy to do that. Also, on our USPTO homepage, go to the Learning and Resources pull-down tab. That's one of the greatest entrances into that website, and particularly look at the events page. We have events going every day of the week, Monday through Friday. I know we're already midway through October, but we still have over 16 programs in the month of October. And one of them that I particularly want to call out, because this may be of benefit to some of your audience today, Alex, is that we are having a program later this month on October 28th, USPTO resources for SBIR, STTR applicants. Knowing that some of your small businesses may be looking for these SBIR, STTR grants, some of which are available through the Department of Defense, this would be a great program for them to tune into and listen to. Again, it's been a pleasure being with you. I wish your audience, your colleagues, the greatest of success. Know that the USPTO is there to help you walk through this process. It's been a
Well,
pleasure, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you for taking the time, and I want to thank your staff because they've done a wonderful job of, filling out the, populating with all the links and stuff. I will tell the audience, feel free to reach out to Elizabeth or directly, and if there's anything that I can do to help make a connection, please feel free. The QR code for my LinkedIn is right on the screen. Just feel free. So, Elizabeth, I have to thank you very much. It's always very informative. Every time I've heard you speak, just like Matt Travis a minute ago, I always feel like there's never enough time to fully explore.
Indeed, indeed.
So, with a little bit of luck, folks will follow up with you, and maybe we'll have a bigger program because there's a lot here to unpack, especially for small businesses and MSPs.
I look forward to it.
Thank you. Have a
Enjoy the
great
rest of your
weekend.
day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Best of luck to all.
Thank you.
Perfect. I love that. I think it was great, and lots of great questions and comments. I'm still here in the background, so if anyone needs anything, let me know. I am just making sure that our next panel is underway, but I'm really excited for this one. What's our next panel going to be talking about?
Okay, so the next panel, you already started the process of bringing the folks on board.
I am, yes.
But we have a combination of MSS, MSP, so folks that support small and medium-sized businesses, and then we have a couple of folks who have worked with both small and medium-sized businesses and MSPs, particularly small and medium-sized businesses who have leveraged third parties to fulfill their CMMC and similar requirements. So I think we have a good crew here, and I see everybody coming on.
The only person I can't find is Joshua. So I'll remain in the background looking for Joshua.
Okay, that'll be good. So, all right, thank you, Phelim. So let me just kind of give a few seconds to everyone on kind of teeing it up, and we'll talk through it, and then I'll let everybody. Sorry, just looking at the chat for a second. Let me give a quick introduction, just kind of going in the order that I see everyone, and I'll let you introduce yourself, and we'll kind of get the ball rolling. So, Kyle Lai. Hello, Kyle. I think you're on mute. We want to get you off mute because we definitely want an active dialogue. So, Kyle has KLC Consulting. He and I have worked on a few things together. He's in particular worked with some MSPs and cloud service providers to help them bolster their own enterprise so they can better serve SMBs. And Sean is from a company called Netswitch. Um, so he comes from the MSS MSP side. They actually have invested in their own infrastructure. It's an ongoing process so that they can help SMBs um, fulfill their needs around cyber governance and alike. And they've got a couple little tools that I think are very interesting for helping to facilitate that process. Because especially as an SMB, you're shy on resources and don't always have as much cash as the bigger guys. Um, Derek, his organization, um, actually, he's got two organizations, and I'll let him talk to that in a minute. Uh, one of the products they offer is actually an enclave. So they can actually use that as a way of collecting your CUI and FCI in a secure environment. So it reduces the scope of what you need to address. And then Leslie, who actually asked a question a minute ago on USPTO, is a long-term cybersecurity consultant who we've worked with before. She's got a very deep background from a lot of different areas, and she's worked with small and medium-sized businesses, SMB, MSPs, and the like to help them bolster their offerings so we can, they can provide, they can support the small and medium-sized businesses in fulfilling their requirements. So what I'm going to do to start this off, if everybody doesn't mind, I will throw out some questions that we collected beforehand to get the
Or the
ball
softball
rolling.
ones.
Well, I'll let you tell me if they're softball or not. All right. Or maybe I'll have to look through the list and toughen them up after that. But I would encourage the audience to throw out stuff. We'll get it going. But I'd ask each of the panel, at least the first time when you inject, just kind of identify yourself. And if you feel like I didn't build out your background enough, just feel free. So, Leslie, I'm going to start with you, just to kind of get the ball rolling. If you were an SMB, having worked with a bunch of them, or if you're an MSP that wants to support them, what do you think a SMB, a small and medium-sized business, should have in their heads before they pick up the phone?
Sure. Well, let me first say thank you for having me here. Second of all, I'm at a separate conference, so if I get disturbed, I apologize. I'm hiding in a conference room, unclear if I'm allowed to be here. Third, I want to talk about my perspective a little bit. So I was working in OUS, the ANS, which is the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. It's the office that published the CMMC. I was there before CMMC. I was working on the research for the DepSecDef when he was trying to understand how much is the DIB spending on cybersecurity. And he was asking myself, I was a contractor. I worked for two GS-15s, and that was it. That was the team trying to answer the question for the DepSecDef, trying to answer the question, how do we stop this flow of IP from our supply chain to China? And we had no budget. We had no external resources. It was just us. So I left in November of 2018. And I left just in time, well, just before it got really fun. So my perspective is from inside the government. I'm also an Army officer. I've been an intel officer and in the DoD for 15 years. So coming to the private sector, I bring that deep policy perspective, I guess, to try to bring that to the private sector. So as a consultant in the private sector for the last 2 years now, the first thing that prospective clients, so when somebody's a prospective customer or client or MSSP, there's always this questionnaire, right? You do this consultation, sometimes it's free, sometimes it's not. But one of the things I always ask is, do you handle CUI? And 9 times out of 10, they say, nah, or I don't think so, or I don't know. Very rarely do the companies say, absolutely, I do. And I would say 1% only say, and I know where it is. So the first thing you should ask yourself as a small business or as an MSSP onboarding new customers is, do you have CUI? If no, or if you don't know, let's make sure you don't know. Let's talk about the information you're getting for or on behalf, or producing for or on behalf of the government. Let's figure out if that is CUI for one. So yes, no. If it's not, then it's all that IP is FCI. So you have one or the other. You don't have neither. And then figure out where that information goes, and that will guide your engagement from here on out. But that is always, I've very early on in 2020, I was doing firm fixed pricing for consulting engagements, and I had to stop doing that because my customers were so uninformed about the data they actually had. So I had to go to an hourly rate or an estimated, amount of hours. Like, hey, I think this will take 10, but these logical exercises would sometimes consume about 5 or 6 hours of literally going through the weeds to figure out if they have CUI. So number one thing, ask what kind of information they have, figure out if it's CUI or not. If yes, then here. If no, then it's FCI, and it's a different path. So that's the first thing.
Yeah, excellent. You're right, because CMMC is all about the asset, and the key asset is the CUI. Excellent point. Now, if you're very basic, maturity level 1, it's FCI only, which is basically contract information, but the real key stuff is CUI. So, Derek, coming at it from a different perspective, right? So Leslie is trying to talk to the client. What do what's going to be the first question that the client should ask? Derek, from your perspective as somebody really providing these services to an SMB, how do you want them to prepare before reaching out to you? What do you want them to ask?
Yeah, no, and thank you for having me on this panel as well. So this I can already tell by what Leslie was saying that this topic it's a little heartbreaking at times, because what Leslie was hitting on, it's just because it is small businesses they're disadvantaged, they're less informed. Parts of the region the United States get less information, more clearly articulated to them. And now with the DFARS interim rule 7019 7020, people are seeing things for the first time. So back to Leslie's question, do you have CUI? Do you not? I mean, if anybody calls you and says, yes, we do, and here's where it is, then they're either freaking out because they haven't done anything, or they're just nervous about making sure they've done it right. So that journey can begin on a lot of different spots. So the further down the tiers, if you will, and the further you get away from the large primes, the more it's a catch-22, the more uneducated in a way they are, these OSCs and these small businesses, but they're also really looking for help and guidance. And you could literally give them a list of everything that they need to do and what they need to buy and what they need to plug in and what they need to manage. They're going to turn around and say, super, can't do it. I won't do it. I don't have time to do it. And that's where we started our business years ago, was on that paralyzed feeling of, I need help, and collaboration is how it gets done. There's Leslie's, there's Kyle's, there's Sean's, and it's not going to get done by one person by themselves. We saw this through COVID. It's an impossible job. So we like to make sure that we say in the front end is, do your research as much as you can, understand your data flows, where does it come into my organization? What people, what teams are taking that information in that we are going to then support and do our job from our contract? Who handles it within? Start with the basics. Who's actually handling information that we would, to Leslie's point, would really not be happy if it ended up in someone else's hands, whether it's a 25-year-old who's a former employee who's mad to China and Russia and our adversaries. Think about that stuff. And then how do you send it out? Where it is within, what tools do you use? What apps do you use? What people? And then where does it go back out? And if you can start to at least feel from an uneducated side on where that's coming in, who's got it, and where it's going out, that helps, because some people do all DoD all the time. Some are 20% of my business, 10% of my business. I don't know. Have those conversations. We've used companies like Kyle and others to help with that conversation on the front end, because nobody should be giving you costs and implementation roadmaps on data that they don't have and outputs that they don't have. It has to be defined on the front end so that you can start controlling your scope and your boundaries of where that information's coming in, staying, and going out.
Now, Derek, you brought up couple of things in there, right? I love the density of everybody who's chatting today. I just love having a lot of meat and a lot of calories in the discussion. Couple thoughts came to mind. First of all, there's a lot of excellent resources out there, right? The National Archives has some good resources. There's some CUI guides. They're clearly not done. There's some way to go, and there's some excellent training. So there's good places to go. That's excellent. I did want to get Sean's perspective on the same sort of thing about finding the CUI and what questions. So before somebody picks you up and says, "Hey, I need to outsource my IT. I got these CMMC requirements. What do I do?" What do you want them to have already thought about? Where do you want their heads at?
Yeah, Alex and Philip, thank you for having me on the panel today. Sort of build upon what Derek was saying is that they need to understand what they have. And many times I'm talking to customers and we talk about data segmentation, whether it's operational data, CUI, IP data, and they don't understand oftentimes the difference between structured data and unstructured data.
Excellent
They don't know
point.
where it's residing. They don't know how it's secured. But to engage, to start the process, there's three questions we typically will ask an SMB. Where do you want to go? What certification do you want to achieve? What are your resources, internal or vendored? And then what's your budget? And it's not to be able to spend every penny of their budget. It's to understand what they can afford and what they can't afford. Because it's no different than going onto a car lot to buy a car. The sales guy wants to know what's your budget, because he's not going to go show you the Mercedes if your budget's a Ford. And SMBs, as they're facing this issue right now, are dealing with the things that Leslie and Derek were just talking about, is understanding where their data is. As Derek said, I don't have time to do that. I can't do that. I can't dedicate my time or my staff to go do that. And they're looking, if they're going to go ahead and engage someone to help them with that, there's a cost. I've got to put things in place to move forward in cybersecurity, and there's a cost. So they need to understand what they can afford and where they're going to spend their money. And the other thing is they need to understand that it's not something that's going to be done quickly. This is a journey, and it's going to take maybe 2 or 3 budget cycles to get where they be.
I think that's an excellent point, right? This is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
That's an excellent point. So Kyle, that's a point that I've seen you make on other panels and other times that we've worked together. Why don't you elaborate on, that thought, and what are the first questions you would have one of your clients prepared to answer before reaching out to an MSP?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, and it's great to hear what Leslie, Derek, and Sean is talking about. So just to add on top of what they're talking about here is the scoping. First thing is the scoping, as what previous panelists has talked about, right? So you do need to make sure you understand what type of information, what CUI you have. I know sometimes it's not too clear on the CUI registry, right? Most of the people there are following the DFARS and CMMC. They have to worry about the cover defense information and cover control technical information. But when you get down to the weed, it's like, does this actually, is that in scope or not? So I think first thing is to identify, look at your contract and identify like what is actually in scope. What kind of data do you actually have that's actually in scope for as a CUI? Then I always tell everyone to, as you go through the scope, you want to go through the data flow and the data life cycle, right? You want to go through and understand how is your CUI information getting into your environment. That means like, where do you actually, get your information? It could be downloading somewhere. You actually go to like DoD Safe or somewhere to actually pull the information out, or do you actually receive from the email, which is many times companies actually get that unencrypted. So that's usually, that's usually was the problem, right? But you understand where you get the information and what type of information do you actually create as a CUI, right? And also then the next is where do you store the information? Where do you store the CUI? Because before you start working with the MSP, you want to understand where is your CUI stored, right? Then I think previous panelists also mentioned who are actually using, and not just who, right? The people, the departments, and the roles, right? Not just those, but what system, what devices, what application are actually using those data, using pulling, working, handling, processing the CUI, transmitting CUI. Then the next thing is sharing. Who do you actually share the information to, right? Because you want to actually understand who you share the information to. So when you are working with your MSP, you might have to open up some, find a way to open up some way to share the information to your downstream suppliers, right? The subcontractors. Then the next thing is the archiving and the backup, right? You want to make sure that you have a proper backup and the storage, and also put in, different contracts have a different requirement. Some contracts actually have the clause that you have to destroy the data after a certain retention period. So consider which contract, or do you actually know which contract, or what's your retention policy down to the contract. Some of the smaller companies may not understand that, but it will be good to actually try to figure out what is your retention policy. Then the last step of the life cycle is to disposal. Right, you have to dispose your data. So make sure that you work with the MSP. What is your process for destroying the data? Making sure the MSP can destroy the data, and nobody can actually find those CUI information after you destroy it. Excellent. So these are kind of the initial step I will recommend the small SMBs to go through.
So that's excellent. Great roadmap. And again, I'd encourage the audience to chime in. This is about you. So feel free to questions, comments, thoughts, whatever, throw it in there. Derek and Sean, let me ask you this, right? Because a lot of this conference is about, or symposium is about actually forming a shared responsibility model with your clients and you, right? They are opening up their treasure chest and giving you some stuff that's very, very important to them. And frankly, they could get shot if you don't do your jobs, right? It's a trust relationship. You can delegate responsibility, but you can't delegate accountability. Maybe you can talk to the model and how do you handle that with an SMB? And I ask you guys because as service providers who do this, you work with 10, 20, 100 different companies, where a small and medium-sized business may have 1, 2, or 3. So they don't have the experience that the two of you do. Yeah. And then I'm going to circle back to Leslie and get her, if she doesn't chime in, I'm going to ask her to talk about responsibility matrix, because I know that's one of the things she talks about a lot. So why don't you guys just kind of dialogue about that, and we'll see where Leslie jumps in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Whatever. I was just going to say it doesn't. Yeah. It's a topic that wasn't being discussed 5 years ago. So it is a conversation that can be. It's very educational for a lot of the smaller to medium-sized companies, because it's what does responsibility mean? It used to, you used to be able to say my MSP does it, so I'm good. Doesn't bother me. But when you start looking at assessment objectives, not just 110 controls, and we see this all the time. I have my gap analysis for 110 things. Well, that's outsourcing responsibility is fine, but when the people that are responsible for the responsibility, whether it's internal or external, are they going to be able to demonstrate and pass the assessment objectives within those controls? So a lot of that comes down to the infrastructure. It comes down to how that is, those boundaries are defined and controlled. For our example with Quick Track, there's no administrative function from a customer perspective. They don't get to play around with configuration. It's a pre-configured network. Everyone uses it the same way. That's all on purpose, and it's not for everybody. There's no solution out there, in our opinion, that's for everybody. It has to fit that customer's direction. Where do they want to go? Sean, you said that. Where do you want to go? I mean, do you want this to be fully segmented off of your network so that your whole business isn't in scope, or do you have to have your whole business in scope? That changes the conversation a little bit. So from a responsibility, it's you when we ask this all the time, say if you're using XYZ or you're using this, have you seen their responsibility matrix, what they are going to be answering the questions and demonstrating on your behalf during an audit? And that could be DCMA audit, that could be a prime who's just really taken the depths. It could be obviously a C3PAO audit at some point in the future. How does that look? And have you had that conversation? And if they say, I don't know what you're talking about, the conversation changes, because this is why it's important. Does it have to be absolutely perfect right now? No. Can you show practices and then get into the CMMC documentation in depth? I mean, yes, but like, how are you doing that? And how are you going to manage that? That's where, whether it's Quick Track or not, or it's something that, Sean or anybody's working with, that's the big question. And the more you can demonstrate that you're going to take that responsibility on, accountability, like you said, they still have to understand what your outsourcing is doing. It can't just be, yeah, it's fine, Quick Track's doing it, I don't have to do anything. That's not it. There's more audit and accountability. There's different things that are now being focused on. So we are very clear on that. We don't believe in the model of let's get them into an environment, let's get them into some licensing, and then 3 months later drop a huge SOW on their lap that says, oh, by the way, we're going to charge you an astronomical amount to then document it for you, although it's our responsibility. So we're going to document it for you and charge you. That should be very, very clear on the front end with their contract and agreement that they're going into place with. So I'll let Sean talk, but that's our big focus on the front end. Is if we can't articulate that, you should be having conversations with other people, because if your vendors can't articulate that, you're going to be in a very tough spot come audit time, where that accountability and that responsibility are going to have to match up.
Yeah, and it's so much of this is a trust, and I have had a career. I'm new to practicing in the cybersecurity, information security. I had a career in apparel manufacturing, global sourcing, and I dealt with all of those risks and risk mitigation. And it's about building the trust, and it's about the accountability that the vendor is going to have to the SMB. Now, how are you going to demonstrate that accountability? It's through reporting and demonstrating what activities are going on. And so one of the things we do is we show with trending analysis over time the improvements to their systems, or the security, the risk mitigation that we've put into place with them. And if Joshua's on here, SMBs need to understand there's a difference between IT security and cybersecurity. They are two different functions.
Excellent
So
point.
as Derek said, people oftentimes say, well, my MSP takes care of that. Well, your MSP is taking care of your network security, your IT security, and they may have some cybersecurity tools, but are they really cybersecurity professionals? Oftentimes, it is playing the referee to keep all the liars honest, quite honestly. So you get everybody into a room and onto the same page to show what's being done. So cybersecurity checks IT. IT puts into place what GRC tells them to. Cybersecurity, through their validations, can show whether GRC has the right policies and procedures in place. And by having all of those people in place to do the right things, it leaves the business management that aren't auditors, that aren't technologists, to understand what they're doing. And it's in that you can build that trust and to demonstrate that you're doing what you said you're going to be doing.
And it's also a requirement. So, I mean, you can't have somebody doing the work and then also saying, yeah, we're good to go, which we all know is a very problem. So that's, and it's MSP versus MSSP.
Right.
What are you getting with your contract to how you're going to identify your scope and then have that assessed by a C3PAO someday or DIBCAC audit, and what that comes with, to your point, Sean, on technical implementation, administrative, and where the shared responsibility is going to be. So if someone's physically hosting the data, then there's responsibility there, but there's also physical responsibility on premise, potentially all these different aspects that, it sounds like a lot, but if you are a smaller business, you have the ability to get that scope right and start thinking through that stuff. And that's where QuickTrack comes into play. We're not just an MSP that just manages, and some MSPs only have a couple clients. I mean, they only have one or two DoD clients, but no one expects them to know everything about this stuff. So how is that responsibility going to come out? And you're right, accountability is a tough thing internally. This is culture change, and even the customer you get to assign them and people responsibility. You have to hold them accountable, because someday that question's going to come up. Tell me, show me this. And if that person says, well, I don't know, or they win the lottery and take off tomorrow, and that's the only person that has the responsibility, that's a big risk to the defense industrial base.
I would just add, it's not an adversarial relationship between your MSSP, your cybersecurity company, and your MSP or your internal IT team. It is not an adversarial relationship. They need to work collaboratively, and a well-run MSSP or a cybersecurity program illustrates the things that the IT team or the MSP need to do on a daily basis. It gives them direction to make the best use of their time. It improves the security of your organization overall, and it improves the resource use that you're putting into the IT network side.
I'm loving this dialogue. One thing I want to throw out there, I don't remember why, but somewhere where, Derek, when you were talking, and I think you've experienced this, is we're finding now with the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, we're finding that a lot of suppliers didn't even know they were part of the DIB. Right? They were 3, 4, 5 levels down, and they're suddenly getting these questionnaires and the like around CUI or their CMMC or their cyber hygiene and all of that. So Leslie, I want to fold you in a bit around responsibility matrix. This is something that we've talked about before. To your point earlier, you were sitting in the Pentagon and they started building CMMC around you, right? And this whole thing just kind of grew up, right?
I was not important enough to sit at the Pentagon. I was at the Mark Center, which is where most of DoD CIO and ANS actually sit. And CMMC was not even a glimmer in the DoD's eye. And to be totally frank and honest, the DoD didn't even know that the DIB was in the DIB. There were rumors going around. Seriously, we didn't know. We thought it was somewhere, we estimated between 100,000 and 300,000. And at some point I was given a spreadsheet from DCMA with the top 100 cage codes and the contract amount for every agency in DoD, top 100 contracts. And I was asked how many companies are in the spreadsheet. Well, some companies have hundreds of cage codes. So we had zero concept of what the actual DIB was. I also know for a fact that the DFAR 7012 clause goes into every single defense contract, whether you have CUI or not. So DoD, that was a CYA. It was a Secretary of Defense scorecard metric that was briefed every quarter to the SecDef as they started inputting it into every contract. So just because you have the DFAR 7012 clause is not indicative that you actually handle CUI, and that's a flow down clause. So every contract, every subcontract that you have under your prime, you should be flowing that clause down. Third of all, so I was a defense contractor for 10 years. I was an Army civilian for 5 years before that. So I'm an intelligence analyst, right? I worked a lot in the intelligence community. And so if you're a defense contractor, you sit on client site, you may, your client might ask you to produce something like, hey, make this slide deck I have to brief to my boss on Friday, and you're creating it maybe on your company computer, maybe since COVID, you're working remotely. If you're doing something on behalf of the government because the government client has asked you to do it, it may or may not be CUI. Like CUI is CUI from the moment it's conceived in your mind, and it must be protected the moment that you get it out of your mind. If you're making Post-it notes with detailed information about a meeting you just went to, like that could be potentially CUI. You have to mark it and handle it appropriately. So there's that whole thing. I almost forgot the initial question. Oh, inheritance matrices. So I just came from High Trust. I no longer work at High Trust. It's not quite public, but on Monday morning I started Deloitte. But my time at High Trust was really interesting because High Trust worked with Microsoft, with Azure, with AWS, and with Google, the 3 largest cloud service providers in the world. It's the country, if not the world. And they developed an inheritance matrix for each one of those cloud service providers. And they realized, well, not realized, but they have developed this very, very formal process by which they identify the inheritance possibility of each control. You can inherit something completely, or inherit something not at all, or partially. Some controls are partially inherited. So back to Sean and Derek's points about how those inheritance details need to be explicitly identified at the SLA and contract level from the very beginning. And if it seems vague, or you can't explain exactly how you're inheriting something, or your MSSP can't explain how they're inheriting something, something's not wrong. You need to get their counsel, your counsel. If you don't have lawyers, have your consultant be consultant, and hammer those details out so that there's not an incident and your incident response plan falls apart because you never identified who's responsible for where it should be reported. I mean, anybody can identify an incident. It could be any user, actually. But like, so I don't know if you guys ever worked in the government. On every government phone, or next to every government phone, there's a bomb threat like card that says what to do if you get a bomb threat. Like, if you get a bomb threat, ask this question, then call the FBI. There should be an incident form the same way on every phone for every employee. Hey, if you click on a link and you think you've been phished, or hey, if your computer won't boot up and you get the blue screen of death, call this person here. Those level of details should be identified and trained, right? Part of the CMMC and the State 171 is that training. Every employee should be trained to that level of detail that impacts them. And those should all be made explicitly clear from the very beginning, not just talked about, but explicit and written in an SLA level, service level agreement document from the very beginning.
So let me ask this question. I'll throw this out to the entire panel. With under the concept of there is the flow down that I think a significant number of people don't realize that they're in a flow, right? They're going to be hit with stuff they don't even know they're going to be hit with. You can outsource responsibility, you give somebody responsibility for a function, but you still own, at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to get shot and you're the one that's accountable. So let me ask this, in developing that matrix, and anybody answer who thinks they're in a position to answer, when it comes to CMMC, what level is that done at? Is it done at the assessment objective level, or is it done at the control level? We're collecting opinions here, so jump in.
So I want to, sorry to come back in, but Alex, you made a statement very early on about how there were still outstanding questions about CUI. And I think there's still outstanding questions here. So all we can do is pontificate until we have precedents, right? Until real, like at scale, companies start going.
This is why we're collecting opinions.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because earlier you said that, the CUI guidance, it's not definitive. So in my time, some of my time in the intelligence community, I spent 2 years as declassification officer for the Defense Intelligence Agency. So what we did is we reviewed every piece of documentation coming from an agency. Some of it was meant for public release, and others we had to just downgrade to secret or FOUO, which is now CUI. So the guidance, the classification guidance, even for the IC, is somewhat vague. But we within our office made those final calls, and me as the deputy OIC, it was our call to say, yes, this is CUI, yes, this is secret, yes, this is PS. So until the government, I don't think we're going to get any definitive guidance until these calls start being made. So I don't think that guidance will ever be published necessarily, maybe like lessons learned, but I think it'll be value calls made by C3PAOs or DOD, but I would not say that we're expecting any more further clarification on CUI. We get the blogs from the National Archives, from NARA, we get some pontification from some of the DOD officials, but DOD officials do not have the authority to say what is CUI and what is not CUI. The official process by which information becomes CUI is a DOD recommends to the National Archives and Records Administration. The NARA looks at all their information, and when it becomes CUI, it gets published in the registry. And the guidance that they give us is the guidance that they give us, and they have bestowed upon us the authority to interpret that guidance and make a value call. Because let's remember, at the end of the day, yeah, CUI is, should be controlled, but it's not top secret information. It is not nuclear codes. So I think people think that they are dealing with like our nation's, most sensitive information. And at the end of the day, the CUI, we get the guidance, we make the value call. And I believe the laws protect us that if we make a well-informed, best decision we can, that's ultimately what we are empowered to do. And we should be making those calls and not be frozen within action because we're scared.
Which goes to your point where you said treat almost anything you're thinking about the contract as CUI. And if you need to make a determination, that's where you rely upon people like yourself or Derek's company to kind of help make that clarification and understanding, and then where are you going to store that data?
Okay.
Not just store it, where are you going to write it? Right. So in the Army, we get these green books. It's like the Army green books. And you will see on the front of it, it'll say their name, their rank, and it'll say FOUO or say unclassified or say TS, because all of your notes can be CUI. CUI is CUI from inception all the way until it's decontrolled, right? Decontrol is a thing. So that's also process, destruction, and dissemination. So yeah, from the whole thing, not just where you store it.
We're going to clear off Post-it notes off of everybody's desks.
Yeah. And notebooks and, everything.
All right,
text messages, even.
All right, so CUI, that might be one of those things where we'll have a whole separate symposium on. Hopefully we'll do that. Hopefully that will be an in-person one. And at some point, I know the conversations will keep on going, so maybe it'll involve a bar or something.
6 weeks worth of time. No.
Yes, exactly. Now, I think to Leslie's point, this is the kind of thing that's almost like common law knowledge, because I know being in the intelligence community, they give you very strict definitions and they give you guidelines, but a lot of it is a judgment call. With that, put it aside. Shared responsibility matrix. Anybody throw in, do we do this at the assessment objective level, or we do it at the control level? Is it a hybrid? What is it?
I think
kind of thing people are wrestling with.
Yeah, I think what I have seen is that people create this, customer responsibility metrics at a practice level. Obviously, they are getting into, down to the weed once you get into the assessment objectives. And assessment objectives, once you get down to the detail, you can actually distinguish, further which one is actually being responsible by you or by the client, or OSCs, right? The organization seeking certification, the OSCs or the MSSP, or is a shared responsibility. So I think, one way to distinguish the MSPs, if they go down to the assessment objective level, I'm pretty sure they know what they're talking about.
Good point.
So
Derek, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I would love to know, Derek and Sean, what do you think about that, right? Because do you have a plan? It has to be a future thing, right? Because the hardcore document doesn't exist. Do you have a plan for going through all the controls within CMMC and saying we do this, we don't do this, or we do this in cooperation with you? Is that kind of a thought, or is it not practical? Is it situational? What do you guys think?
Definitely situational based on where the customer is, where they're starting, where they've been, who they work with. So I know we've talked about that a handful of times already. So, our situation with QuickTrack, it's a pre-configured network. So we're not configuring it to every single client in different ways where documentation and responsibility will shift. Some of the nuances may change responsibility, to Kyle's point, to the assessment objective level. There are controls that are shared. So you can't just set a control to MSP when there are things that the customer is responsible for. So we get into that. But if they, it's one of the first questions we're going to ask is if they work with an MSP or they have internal or external resources, you ask them about the responsibility. And if they look at you like they've never heard that before, then that's an educational conversation. That's going to take some time to integrate what that's going to mean. If they say, yep, here's my one from this application, here's my this and that, then that is more of a review. And companies like Kyle, we know Kyle and KLC, Leslie, I mean, that's where if they're in a position where they've had these contracts and they've been dealing with CUI for years and they're behind, that roadmap looks a little different than someone who's seeing this for the first time and they said, well, we don't make bombs. We hear that we don't make bombs, so we're nobody. And it's like, well, I mean, that you can't just make that decision. So work with the partners and trusted resources who can help you identify that stuff, because that responsibility, to Kyle's point, at the assessment objective, and that's the route they go. That's going to be key. It just is.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Sorry, I don't like. I just want to double down on that. I had a lot of clients who would, sign up for consulting services, and they'd be like, "Cool, here's our MSSP, here's our this, here's our that," and they would bounce. And then we were all like, I was always friendly, but they viewed us as competitors or each other as competitors. So I would advise all small businesses to stay involved. Don't just bounce and let your consultants take over it. Have somebody from the company, internal, with skin in the game, that dials in, that can make your people play nice to each other, because they are in some cases competitors in the same space. And so you want to make sure that everyone plays together. So have skin in the game, keep skin in the game, and stay informed of what's going on with your own company.
Yeah, that goes back to the whole thing. You're always accountable. And I think the other thing to highlight before we go, because Phelim's coming in and going to tell us we go on to the next thing. Other thing to highlight is that many businesses are going to have more than just CMMC requirements,
Right.
right? They're going to have ones that they choose for themselves. They're going to be governed by other regulations. They might be in healthcare and have HIPAA. I could walk that PCI. One of the nice things about standards and regulations is there's so many to choose from, right?
Right.
There's just so many of them.
Yeah. There's, for an SMB, I talked to this, and actually the topic for me came from Carter Schoenberg with Soundway Consulting, is that, you're a small 8A company in Virginia, you win this contract with the DoD, it moves you to the next level, everybody's happy, they're popping champagne. The execution for the contract's in San Diego. You have an incident. Well, now you fall under CCPA. Well, you weren't certified for CCPA. You don't have an incident response plan set up for CCPA when you have the incident in San Diego. You were just CMMC certified. So
There you go.
it's important for an SMB when they're dealing with this entire process, to your point about HIPAA and other things, is that they understand where they are in alignment to those other standards. They need to be aware of it. The company that's coming in to certify for CMMC is only going to be doing that unless you engage them to do those other things. And may not be that one auditor. The organization may have somebody to help with that. Consultants can help with that. The crosswalk between each of these compliances is not big crosswalks. There may be a couple other things you have to do. But small and mid-sized businesses need to be aware of 50 different laws in regards to information security and data privacy that are going to end up being across this country, because there is no federal standard at the state levels. And so California is different than Virginia, than Colorado, than Wisconsin, than
And
New
there's
York.
this thing, state ramp is a thing. Some state CIOs have gotten together to create state version, but then
Right.
Also states will slow down FedRAMP requirements, which you can't get if you're not a federal. So the states don't even understand the compliance requirements that they are pushing onto their potential vendors. And so you have to educate them, and it is a massively complex. So the more you can educate yourself, the more you can potentially educate your potential customers.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw in first of all, there's 53 because you got DC and the other two provinces. This is something I get caught up in fairly frequently. The other part of it is this is why the world is moving towards concept like privacy and security by design. So the idea is you basically come down to only reporting requirements that are different. So your technical controls don't change. The downside is that starts elevating, the consensus is we're going to elevate the level of cyber hygiene instead of going to promoting mediocrity, which I fully endorse. It just means that, there's a lot more here. And
I think it's better. It will be good to actually have somebody that is cybersecurity advisor in the industry that you are actually focused on, to understand that what other regulatory requirements that you have to comply with, right? Because CMMC, the whole thing, right?
Now, there's a couple of chats I'm getting, and I'd encourage people to put them in the public chat, not just the one to me. Folks would like this to keep going all day. They really would. And we probably could discuss this subject, but we're already being a little rude to our panel. Phelim, I'll turn it over to you because we have the next round of guests that we're supposed to start 4 minutes ago. I want to personally thank everybody. I really enjoyed it. I love this dialogue. We're getting a lot of good feedback on it. Thank you again.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank
Well,
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks ever so much. That was a fantastic panel. I will put you back in the audience. Look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you, Leslie, Derek, Sean, Kyle, and of course, Alex.
Thank you.
So fantastic, lots and lots and lots of topics, lots and lots of food for thought. But what if we looked at this very topic through the less initiated eyes? Now, it's very true. We do have someone on our panel who is not less initiated, who does know what's going on with CMMC. But let's look at it through a wider prism. Why don't we say, you know, we've already said NIST 800 171, you know, you're already there, right? You're already there. There's lots of things you're already doing. Let's look at it through vendor management. Let's look at it through third-party risk, because a lot of people might think, oh, is this another GDPR? Actually, maybe there's a lot we've already been doing. So let's bring our panelists up, and then I will do an introduction. Welcome, Joshua. I'll do an introduction in just one moment. I'll just make sure everyone is here. Great. So if everyone can start their videos. Okay. Brilliant. Well, welcome everybody. We have a very, very diverse panel here because we are delighted to be welcoming Joshua Lieberman, CEO of NetSciences out of New Mexico. We're welcoming Michael Bonner, Security Operations GMI out of Arizona. We're welcoming Brian Stoner, Managed Security Services Lead at Stellar Cyber out of everywhere in the States. Richard Corrigan, who is a cybersecurity architect and engineer out of San Diego, and Debbie Kruzic, founder of TechTin out of New Mexico. It's a pleasure to have you all on the panel. I know this is perhaps an interesting grouping, but I feel it's a necessary one, because for all the talk of CMMC, for all the completely certified CMMC staff that we've had on today, we need to translate it to, well, what does that mean? How does that apply to what we've already done? Now, it's very true. Richard is a CMMC expert. That's true. But by and large, on our panel, we're trying to translate the topic, both from a small business perspective, an MSP perspective, MSS perspective. Now, I know, Brian, you don't have too much time. So what have you made of the debate so far today?
So I think it's been a really great conversation to help just educate the audience on the complexity that's involved in these things, but also kind of the common sense things that you need to do, understanding the classification of your data, understanding the different controls that you need to meet. But I deal with this from a vendor perspective, which is a little different because when the provider needs to meet those requirements, they come back to me, much the same way, you know, I go back to my accountant when the IRS calls, right? So we've actually had to move to leveraging an RFP application within our business to host the answers to all of the questions that we answer on a regular basis. So it's been kind of an interesting experience, especially since the SolarWinds and Kaseya incidents. I think it's been really kind of top of mind for a lot of people when they're dealing in those compliance areas, and they have to understand the posture of their suppliers. You know, obviously we need to help them with that.
Indeed, and this is why we're all sort of value added assistants, aren't we? We're value-added resellers, value-added advisors. And every time people bemoan the death of the MSP model, it doesn't die. Why? Because someone finds another way of adding more value, which is always good. Joshua, welcome. Let me go straight to you. I think a nice high-level way to look at this is onboarding and working with third parties. So let's not use this CMMC frame, let's just talk in general. What are we talking about when we talk about best practice for these third-party vendor onboardings or bundlings?
Well, thanks a lot, Phil. It's nice to be here, and it's amazing to have a second New Mexican on the same call. So, hi, Debbie. I'm going to spin this a little different because I'm going to just share our experience of like the last 18 months or so and still answer your question. When we go out and meet a lot of the smaller businesses with 5, 10, or 20 seats that are now looking at CMMC compliance, they are not prepared by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, almost without exception, they don't even have a cybersecurity practice yet or anything like it. I mean, they're really not there. They don't have even the basics. So that's a big deal for us. We have to bring them up to speed. And our best practice is to treat them like any other customer and make sure that there's a firewall, backup, endpoint protection, and all the other real basics. Then we build a project plan for them and explain to them why they're going to go from not 0 to 60, but 0 to 100, because they're under the gun. Now, some of them, even many of them, will look at their commitments that'll be necessary to meet CMMC or even NIST 800-171 as it stands now and decide it's not worth it. They don't have the business to support it, and they'll just step away from the bar. But those that do want to sidle up and have a drink, then we'll work through this with them. But the long, short answer is that first we build the basics in, and then we explain to them what the next steps are. It's not a quick job.
No, it's not. It's not a quick job, is it? And it's also a bit of a tricky one. As people are saying, well, you need a modern slavery statement to say that you've interrogated your supply chain to what level? Third, fourth, fifth, sixth levels. Is this something that a small business might be able to achieve? Let me come to Debbie, because Debbie, you're not an MSP. You are a small business, and you do work in this infrastructure ecosystem. How easy is it to define, best practice for vendor onboarding and so on?
I thought it was interesting in the last panel about how the one gentleman, I think it was Kyle, brought up the document management and records management piece, because that's my background, but also how important that really is in a lot of the stuff that's been discussed, about the CMMC and the CUI. So I see that being a component of the whole solution, not just the managing of the hardware and software, but it seems like there's a connection there of bringing in that expertise as well to help, because if a company can't even really manage their documents as they are, and then they want to go after a DoD contract and so on, that to me is a big leap to, you need to get the first one done before you could even go to do the other one. So I think that's kind of something I, came to mind after the other, and then what Joshua just said. So, but it definitely, I've had DOE contracts in the past, but I've never a DoD one. So this is definitely new.
And then how would it change, your work or any work of any small business if suddenly you got caught up in a third, fourth, or fifth party supply chain of a DoD thing? I can think Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, big employer. I think that if you go to fifth stage, connections, surely everyone is in one way or another linked. So Debbie, how will one work out this supply chain in the future?
Gosh, I don't know if I have the expertise to answer that, but it is very interesting. I do think that there's a lot of pieces, but I also think about assessments, and if people can build some quick things to at least have a big part of the what you might need to get, like a checklist, so that you could immediately know, my gosh, there's just no way we could do number 9, or whatnot. And so I think building some checklists to help people decide if they even, or a small company, want to even go that route, and just some things in that manner, I think would be helpful to start getting it so it doesn't seem so overwhelming, I guess.
And that's maybe the key word. It will seem overwhelming. if you're a small business. So that's important. Now, I will get to you, Richard, because I know, Richard, you have experience with CMMC, but let's ask Michael, because Michael, I know you have experience with PCI, and I know that you thought there was some interesting parallels.
There are. And so I'll circle back to that in a second, but just to a point that's been brought up, I think when we talk about like the supply chain and how we're figuring out this chain of where we are in the process, one thing I'm finding out with a lot of my clients is that they don't even know about CMMC, and yet they're being given requirements in MPAs, MSAs, NDAs. And the language is clearly like they're calling out Cui, they're calling out CUI, and it's like, okay, so this is clearly from CMMC, but they have no idea what it is. And out here in Phoenix, we have a lot of manufacturing, a lot of silicon, a lot of that kind of stuff, and people have no idea how these things are used. And so these people may not even know that they're in that supply chain, and they don't know anything about CMMC, and they come back to us and say, hey, I've got this new list of requirements, and this is way different than anything they've ever given us before. Any idea why they're doing this? And then we have that conversation. So like, I think I'm even, a step back from, hey, I may not be prepared to it, to, hey, I don't even know what this thing is. But then along the lines of when it comes to, doing stuff for PCI, way back when I was QSA, I did a lot of PCI auditing. And one of the challenges I always had with PCI was that it didn't necessarily fix problems. It made some companies just better liars. It would become a conversation of, well, can we interpret it this way, or can we rescope things this way? And we're starting, and in some of my clients, we've been starting to see that same question start popping up where, hey, 10% of our manufacturing is for this one supplier that wants these CMMC things. What if we isolated that and segmented that off to, this part of the network? Then do we have to have these things apply to the rest of it? And I am not an expert in CMMC, so I have no idea. And when we go and bring in their supposed experts, we've gotten both answers. Some people say absolutely, and then other people come in with no, and I come in with the maybe. So we've got all our bases covered. It's awesome. And so, what I'm hoping is that with CMMC, and obviously I'm not super familiar, and I'm coming in with no experience here. I'm really hoping that there's like an auditing body and, auditors that can come in and really kind of drill in and live and give, more prescriptive things, give clarification, and really have that stick to make these companies do these things, especially because some of these things are incredibly important, national defense type stuff.
Hey, Fallon?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I just wanted to, one of the things I pointed out to people when we meet them is there's slightly a better chance you are somewhere in that chain than there is that you're related to Kevin Bacon. I don't know if everybody remembers the 5 degrees of separation, but there's really only about 2 or 3 degrees separation. We have a lot of people that don't realize they're going to be covered by this regulation. So sorry, I'll quiet up now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love the Kevin Bacon quote. I'm gonna use that. Richard, you do have experience with CMMC, but looking at this whole thing through the prism of maybe SMBs that don't understand what's going on or don't know that they are related to Kevin Bacon, what would supply chain best practice, look like in the real world anyway? How on earth will we get to know if we're in scope, Richard? I think you're on mute, Richard. Sorry.
I can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with utilities. A lot of my experience began at Sempra Energy with SDG&E, SoCal Gas, Encore in Dallas. And a lot of the utilities don't realize that they need to be CMMC compliant because they do retain, if you've got DoD facilities in your territory, you have a lot of their information and it needs to be protected. And so this is a new revelation this year that, I'm starting to see from a lot of the utilities that I work with.
And so utilities don't even know it. But why don't we go more macro than that? How could anybody start to, okay, we know who our suppliers are, but how can we start to demand of our suppliers that they tell us who their suppliers are? Is this even feasible?
Yes.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, because there's a much
big enough.
Tell us
there's
how.
much more transparency in supply chain today.
but how will they make them do it? Because if I got a contract, and I do have actually a contract with some big company in the, in this scope, right? I know they could probably sit on me and say, right, tell me everything I want to know. But if I am contracting General Dynamics, I don't think, okay, that's a bad example, because then I will know that they're in scope. Let's say I'm contracting another company that's really big. How am I going to get the information out of them for their supply chain?
You just got to find the right contacts. I mean, sometimes you're going to run into people in that supplier that are going to push back, but then you'll find that people who get it are willing to work with you, and you just kind of have to find the right contacts. And usually it's going to be through procurement.
Okay, no, it's a good slant, because a lot of these contracts are already covered under Foreign and Corrupt Practices Act. So I guess lots of people just certify, and then you certify the certification of someone certifying the thing, and you hope that this will be all right. Let's then go back to you, Joshua, and then work our way around again. A lot of people say, well, isn't this covered by insurance? I know that's a bit of a red to a bull, because of course insurance is not going to cover any actual loss or damage to reputation, or in fact will stop you getting prosecuted. But there's a sense that I've put insurance in place. Surely that is going to help me with any potential breach, even if I am not CMMC compliant. What would you say, Joshua? I think I know.
Well, yeah, that's a stretch. So people who have cyber or crime insurance always are involved in filling out an application. And I've watched in the last 5 years that those have gone from self-attestation, like NEST 800-171 to be on point, to actually having to carefully fill these out, and even providing screen caps of proof of things like two-factor authentication and whatnot. So while 5 years ago, I think on a previous panel, somebody mentioned our customers just became better liars in reference to the self-attestation, we're past that, or at least getting past that when it comes to applying for insurance. So the answer is, if they weren't truthful about their security posture before they grab that cyber liability, it's one thing to buy it, but it's yet another to have a claim covered, even if it is a coverable claim, which upgrading your infrastructure wouldn't be. But nonetheless, it's one thing to buy the insurance, yet another to get that covered. And to address that, I think the industry has just made it more difficult to qualify to be a purchaser by raising rates dramatically in some cases, by being much more aggressive about doing the upfront work. And even as MSPs, I'm starting to hear that we're looking at a future where we're going to have to attest that our clientele, each and every one of them, is covered by cyber. So that's going to be the whole next step. To take it back to your question, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. But it's an oft put out thing, like, we've got insurance for that. And believe it or not, even on some of the MSS forums, there are MSPs in not any of these geographies, but in other geographies that go, yeah, we have that because of insurance, which, yeah, okay. Which I personally, Debbie, what then can the SMB do amongst all of this? Because the SMB requires cyber insurance, but you're pretty sure it won't pay out on many things. You're required to certify that you are X, Y, and Z, including CMMC in the future, or maybe not. How can you start to make your onboarding process, tighter? What does that look like? Or how can we ask a better question about onboarding? Because it seems such a difficult question.
Gosh, I mean, one thing that comes to mind is if anything's going on with, like, if you were a sub, if you will, like if a small business, especially for a Department of Defense, you would think sometimes that you're more often to be a sub versus a prime. So do you feel that those primes would be helping you to do a lot of this stuff as their sub? I mean, that's what I would kind of be looking for, is like, okay, well, if they're much bigger, what can they do to help me? Or are they going to pretty much expect you to have all this, taken care of on your own, like you said? So, I mean, that to me would be one of the things I would would hope that there would be help coming from your prime if you were just a small company that was just doing a small piece, because to ask small businesses to do all of this themselves for, I think a lot of companies wouldn't even bother to bid on it. Or at least personally, I probably wouldn't bid on something like that. So I don't know, I just wonder what's anything going on. Anybody seeing anything with the prime and sub and trying to make this a better
I like
thing.
I like that, and you make a great point, because of course in the defense industry, people are forever trying to be a prime or a subcontractor. One day one big contractor wins the prime contract, and the other one says, well, oh well, I'll be the subcontractor, and they go, okay, right, and it switches around. So that there is not a camaraderie, but there is that procedure. Michael, what do you think then? Because surely the smaller SMB can only slap on a little bit of insurance, and I don't know, is it up to the prime contracting them to do all the due diligence?
I don't know. From what I've been involved with so far, it kind of feels that way, especially for folks that know nothing about it and don't have a security team, or we might be their security team. In everything that I've seen flow down, nothing has seemed unreasonable. Like, these are all services that, as an MSSP, we should be providing to our customers. Sometimes they opt not to have those. But to Debbie's point, yeah, if you don't have any of that stuff in place, it can be a bit cumbersome. I mean, nothing in there seems unreasonable. It does kind of feel like the upstream, that primary needs to tell their subs and the subs of their subs, hey, you are now involved in this process. This is now a framework you need to meet, and having some consequences for not meeting it. And I don't know about that process, the stick end. I don't know how they're, pushing that enforcement. I'm hoping that there is some mechanism for those primaries to be able to push something down to those subs, to be able to motivate them to do it, as opposed to just them saying, yep, we're good, and they've done nothing in their infrastructure. So,
and that is a good angle then to go down. Let's use that. Richard, what is the promise of the stick within CMMC to maybe achieve that?
Wow. The STIG is pretty verbose, and maybe it's a matter of trying to come up with sort of a subset of that for SMBs, because many of the requirements don't always apply to the SMBs. And so maybe there needs to almost be a derivative of the STIG for small, medium businesses. And, I was just thinking about the DBEs, the disadvantaged business entities.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, I'm wondering if they can actually get away with not complying, because we give them a lot of concessions.
That is an excellent point, because one of the ways that you can spend federal, but also state tax dollars directed is to say, a veterans organization, we want to support veterans, let's win some contracts for local education, or win some contracts for the city planner. And of course, if CMMC spills over and all the other government organizations copy it, that is a big point, isn't it? Because,
well, they got to give about 20 or 25% of their spend, whether they're federal or municipal, to the DBEs.
But then we're assuming that maybe they are not equipped to do it. But then maybe, I mean, Richard, what in CMMC could you imagine being very difficult for a disadvantaged business?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and review the requirements to kind of answer that in detail. But yeah, there's just a number of the requirements, is if I recall, that quite frankly wouldn't, they apply more to a larger organization than they do a small, medium business.
Okay, no, I like that, because if you look though at GDPR and how it's been applied here, and how maybe some people are fearing CCPA is going to be applied in California, yes, British Airways got a big fine, and then it got made a bit smaller and whatever, but they're massive as a company. But I think that the Information Commissioner's Office has made an example of several smaller businesses because they're easy to prosecute. So you would hope that CMMC wouldn't suddenly, bring up a bakery in Kentucky and hold them in front of everybody and shake them down. You'd hope they wouldn't do that as an example, but we're talking hypotheticals now, so I don't know. All right, I've got another question on my list. I'm not just pointing in the sky; it is actually up there. Joshua, when we run our MSS forums normally, people are often saying, if you have to go back to the SLA, something's gone desperately wrong. It should be about trust. It should be about relationships. We've seen the emergence of stricter and stricter SLAs and maybe NDAs. How does it affect working with third and fourth party risk? Because surely people are going to sneak in a lot of interesting things into those contracts.
I think I understand your question. Let me paraphrase it and you can tell me if I do. You're asking me what the impact on SLAs. You also mentioned NDA, I think, but you're focused on SLA. Is that correct?
Yeah, focused on
okay.
SLA, yes.
Okay. So you asked what the impact of our SLAs might be, or what CMC's impact might be on our SLAs. The only thing I can address there is that there's nothing in CMMC that I'm aware of, and I'm good up to level 3, that is related to response times to tickets that are open. It's not the case that they're going to suddenly become non-compliant over the course of a couple of hours. It's not to say they won't do something silly, but what I'm saying is I don't see how CMMC weaves into that particular equation. What will matter is that we set the milestones and achieve them on date and on target. And that's where it gets tricky. On another group recently, I pointed out that one of the things CMMC does really well is make securing these small businesses more of a cooperative thing. They have to play with us, right? That this is no longer a spectator sport. If I might be so libertine, this is not pornography, this is sexual activity. You're not watching. We're not the only people performing. It's security that is collaborative. And I think that that's more important. And as that relates to SLAs, what I see as the biggest challenge is all of a sudden our clients are going to have to be responsive to us. They know all about us responding to them quickly. And everybody who's ever run a business in this field knows that there are clients that will take weeks to respond to fairly urgent emails or calls. But if you don't respond in minutes or hours to their most trivial request, you've fallen out of the game. So this will be interesting because they will have to be responsive to us. Now, I'm not sure that directly addresses your SLA question. It kind of flips it, but that's what I see.
Well, and just to throw this out really quick, so we've gotten some documentation from our clients about their primaries asking them to sign new stuff. And it seems to be across the board, anywhere between 48 and 72 hours. The primaries are asking the subs to, upon discovery, inform them of what's going on. So even if it's not called out as a requirement, I think a lot of these primaries are trying to get ahead of that and putting their own SLAs in, and then they're hopefully trying to drive that with their customers.
When did you ever hear Captain Kirk ask Scotty to do something in a week and a half? But anyway, I get your point.
Yeah, every contract I review has a security clause in it that has those kind of response parameters in it.
Which kind of contract are you referring to, Richard? What contracts are you reviewing? You mean usually sub?
I'm sorry?
Prime to sub or MSP contracts?
MSP contracts.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that's really interesting because along with the Captain Kirk, and it was great to see Captain Kirk go to space. But I think that responsiveness is going to really change how we do business, because conversely, how do we do it now when there are real reporting requirements? FCPA, I mentioned FCPA before. Let's imagine that someone in the supply chain was approached to be bribed, and everyone assumes that bribery has to be reported directly if it's a government official, but actually the FCPA has implications for corporations too. Already there's an implication to report the attempt to bribe. And where does that go? Does that go up the supply chain? And how long have you got? Have you got 15 minutes? Have you got a day? Is it even fast enough? As Joshua pointed out, SLAs are about, speed and agility. So there's already things that they have to report on, such as, by the way, your very, very small package that you bought from us, we're going to give you a ticket. In the middle of the night, you lost $1 million. Don't worry about it. We'll tell you in the morning, right? There's always that sort of scenario if you don't buy enough stuff. But I feel we've got existing obligations there already. So Debbie, in that vein, when we choose an MSP of the future or an SMSP of the future, how will an SMB vet them?
Boy, that's a good question. I think, again, I would be looking for some type of checklist or something that, that I would want to get that done right away, just to kind of filter it down. I think that would be one thing. I know that recently we're talking to a customer about a document management system in the cloud, and it was interesting that they asked if the software vendor was CMMC compliant. And so you kind of wonder, like, in regard to an MSP or the software that's being actually used, if there's going to be things like that you would need to find out, is that, I don't know the level of, do you have to find out if a piece of software is CMMC compliant, or if the MSP you're thinking of hiring is. It just seems like there's a lot of open questions there, but I do think that somebody probably could be putting together some checklist. I've seen some online, some interesting things that it seems like people are trying to build that, or even a software, like a little tool, assessment tool to help you get there. And so I think some of that will start happening, where you're going to see like a software tool that's going to help you get, maybe vet 80% or get you, so I think we're going to see some things in that manner once they decide on all the specifics, right?
Indeed, and something like a checker trade would be handy, wouldn't it? Or what if, just like everyone has a credit rating, Americans get given a credit card at birth to help with credit ratings or whatever, right? What if everyone gets a security rating? Okay, now we sound a bit like China, but
there's companies that do that.
Yeah,
there's companies that do that, and you could use their service and get their ratings to instead of you having to go do an assessment of the vendor yourself.
Somebody has to rate the raters, though. I mean, this is a really good idea, I think. I think that eventually having a credit level or rating makes a lot of sense. I'm sorry, a security rating, like a credit rating, but I don't know who's going to be authorized and how that's going to be policed across 52 jurisdictions that make up the states and territories of the United States that this applies to. That's going to be tough. But it's a great idea. I would love to be able to walk into a place and whip out my tricorder and say, oh, 735, this place isn't bad, because that way I could avoid opening the doors on the 400s that most of them are. But I know what you're saying. That would be a great idea.
Yeah, it'd be pretty handy. And then, of course, a comedic thing comes to mind where they say, well, I'm very sorry, when you were 5 years old, you left the door unlocked, and so your credit rating is forever gone down.
It'll be on your permanent record.
Yeah, something like that. What about you, Michael? How can we then build the future SMSP or MSP that is an MSS, and how can customers have faith in them? Is it literally how many times have they been breached? What do we need to know?
I really wish I had an answer for you. I don't know. I've done third-party risk assessments for companies in the past. We typically have a questionnaire where we're looking for metrics that are important to us, things that we think drive, risk qualification. I think we will probably get there with, I don't know, some kind of CMMC checklist. I haven't seen one of those out there. They probably exist. I probably just am ignorant of them. But just understanding how someone is scored, my only challenge is it is it done by a third-party audit or is it self-assessment? And if it's self-assessment, I have less faith in that. So, it would be nice if there was some kind of governing body that could do that assessment, and then that kind of assessment was available publicly, right? Like traditionally, if you have other types of, products or processes, there's folks like PwC that go out and do audit is publicly available. So having something like that would be amazing, but I have no idea if that's even a possibility for MSSPs. I mean,
yeah,
it also implies a level of financial commitment. Already, these folks are looking at a pre-assessment in some cases and an assessment, and spending money almost without exception to come up to speed after both of those, and committing to an MSP. And the idea that they're going to throw money at Price Waterhouse, because there are no 4-digit bills from PwC. So I don't really think that those guys can send you a letter for $9,999. So I think that it would be more interesting to me if this was an organization that was run privately, but like PwC, but attested or backed by government authorities, so that you could travel the country with a large organization and just run and do these credit ratings, these security ratings. I really like the idea, Phelim. It had come up in one other discussion before. It was equally fun to make fun of it, but I think it's a good idea.
Somehow we'll get it done. So I guess, okay, let's make a sort of conclusion from this panel, and let's invite everybody to make a sort of concluding statement, but maybe based around what can we really hope to get out of today's session, because we've had some excellent experts. We've had the people who are actually running the CMMC, right? So we've had all of that, and then we've had these panels both with people who are assessors and people who are not as well. Let's ask about what we can hope to take home from that perspective. And I'll go around. I'll start with you, Debbie. What could we possibly hope to walk away from today's session having received, having thought about?
I think just, the importance of knowing about it, first of all, right? And kind of narrowing down the specifics. And if it's something that you would even want to engage for your company, I think it would be an important thing, before you get overwhelmed with it all or think about costs, even just to get to the point, do you even want to even be bid on any of these type of requirements like that, or do you want to stay in more your private sector or less regulated? So that would be, I guess, for me, that would be the starting point. And then if I felt like, well, there is, a reason to do this, or, then all the people that have talked today, you'd have some good background to go and get some help. But I guess for myself, at first, I would want to grasp the basics and see if it would be even something I would want to do.
That is important, and that intimidation versus relevance balance. I think that's key, because one can spend a lot of money getting pre-certified, but is it what we're after for everybody? I don't know. Richard, what do you hope that people will come away from today is sort of wanting to do now? It's good to know that it exists, but now what do you hope people are going to want to go and do?
Well, I think for small and medium businesses, it would be great if there was a CMMC self-assessment kit that would lead them through how to determine if they're compliant, what are their POAMs, what are their variances that they could maybe submit, to DoD or some CMMC agency within the feds that could, sign off on it. Almost like provide that as their own internal report without having to go through the expense of hiring, agencies or companies to come in and do that for them, because a lot of the small and medium businesses are, they don't have the money to necessarily do it, but they want to, be able to qualify for federal work because they're the largest customer in the world.
Indeed, and if especially if you want to enact change through, getting contracts with, as you mentioned before, disadvantaged businesses. That's the tip of the iceberg. how are you going to hand out these contracts to help local communities if you then turn around and take the money away from them for being non-CMMC compliant? Tricky. Michael, what about you? How does this compare to some of the talks that we have in the MSS forums normally? What can we sort of try and get away from this one?
Well, I mean, in comparison with previous talks, I do want to go out and say, I think I first learned of CMMC from one of our previous talks. So maybe sometime last year. So that was really cool. Along the lines of, things that I've picked up today, not just from this talk, but from all of them, have been that, everyone is trying to do the right thing. We're all moving towards a common goal. We're looking to not be overly prescriptive. I think the awareness of CMMC is fantastic. I think that some organizations need to work on driving that down to some of their subs. I think as service providers, it may be on us to educate some of our clients on where they may fit in this ecosystem, and kind of drive it from both ways and just let them know, there's nothing here that's crazy. There's nothing here that is unachievable or, unreasonable. And, maybe as an MSSP, here's how we can help accommodate some of these requirements that you may not meet today. So that's kind of what I'm taking across or taking away.
I like that. Trusted advisor, finding more value to add, and it's good, and it's nothing to be afraid of. And then Joshua, I know I've come to you last, and so what one can take away, maybe we've already looked into it, but what would your parting thoughts be for this session?
This is kind of the electric Kool-Aid acid test of IT security here. CMMC is not self-attestation, at least not at level 2 and 3. It's not something you're going to talk your way around. You're not going to negotiate past this. So if you make the determination that the value of the contracts you deliver upon that will be covered by this are worth it, you have to dive in. I think it's a great thing because it's likely to proliferate across the industry to other non-DoD, DOE covered entities and other, even non-government covered entities. It might be the first truly serious step forward that maybe everybody thought HIPAA was 15 years ago. HIPAA has not turned out to be that at all, but that's again, because it's mostly self-attestation until you get caught. But this is the number one thing I see when I walk into business that suddenly has an interest in taking care of their IT. They think it's a weight loss program. They think they just got to lose a quick 40 pounds, they'll be on the balance beam at the Olympics. It isn't going to be like that. This is a fitness program that builds to a training regimen that becomes an Olympic challenge. This is the start of actually taking IT security seriously and collaboratively with their provider. I think it's a great thing. I'm just not sure how many people are going to die before they make it to the balance beam. It remains to be seen.
I love it. What a great analogy. Before we had Captain Kirk analogy, and now the fitness regime, I think.
Just don't tell Kevin Bacon.
Oh, and Kevin Bacon as well. Yeah. Well, thanks. We must draw a line under it. Joshua, Michael, Richard, Debbie, and before Brian, thanks ever so much for being such great panelists. I know this is a bit of a futurology panel, a bit of a what if panel, but I think very necessary. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you in the audience. Perfect. Well, I really enjoyed this session, and yeah, I hope to see everybody in the audience. Now let's welcome back Alex, and we will bring up our next fantastic speaker. I will hello Shalini, nice to see you. Here we go, and I'll bring our next speaker up and do an introduction. Alex, how was that? Was that good? Was that good fun?
Yeah, it was. It's always interesting to hear the perspectives of people who aren't inside the bubble. They're looking from the outside in and kind of bumping into it. It's always, I think that's always a very different perspective and very, very useful.
Perfect. Well,
really cool. So
we're going to move on.
With
I'll
that
give you the floor.
said, let me introduce Doug Barbin. Doug is with Um, there we go. Glad to have you back. This is why we need an SLA.
I know, I know. Yeah, well, great to welcome you, Doug. I'll leave you. You've got the floor.
So, Doug, why don't you take it from here? You can explain what Schellman does and how that fits into everything we're talking about, and third-party attestations and all of that. Just it's all yours. Have at it.
Good for me to share screen. Then
Absolutely, yeah.
okay, great. All right. Cool. All right. So all right. So feel free to stop me or wherever, Alex, Phillip, whatever makes sense. Any questions that come up. This is not meant to be a talk. It's definitely not a sales pitch. What wanted to briefly talk about here is, why are we here? I know that CMMC is a big topic, and you asked me to kind of bring that into context with some of the other attestation standards and so forth that are out there. As Alex Hercliffe said, yeah, we are a top 100 CPA firm that doesn't do any traditional accounting. I've done very few days of honest accounting in my life. I started as a forensic accountant and then got into investigations and forensics and security, which has kind of led me here into the audit world, where we perform these different types of compliance assessments and issue reports because our clients need to give these reports to their customers, in order to enable trust, to, in many cases, just like with CMMC, to close business, right? There's no secret that, compliance is used because it's a regulatory requirement or a contractual requirement in many cases. It's also used to, from an MSP perspective, to satisfy customers, to help customers and be compliant with these different regulations, with these different requirements. And that's a theme when we're talking about MSSPs and SMB market and compliance. The key message is always going to be this is a shared model, a joint collaborative effort, whereby the MSSP may have a set of responsibilities, the customer or the SMB may have a set of responsibilities, and there may be some shared responsibilities. Any cloud computing model, right, dictates that the cloud provider, an Amazon or a Microsoft or a Google or an Oracle, are going to have a set of infrastructure and services and SLAs that they are required to meet. But then the customer has a certain amount of responsibilities too, like not leaving your firewall open or not, configuring your Amazon S3 buckets with, read only, read access to the world, type of thing. But it is important to note kind of from the get-go that this compliance is a collaborative space whereby the MSSP works hand in hand with the customer, because ultimately it's the customer, in many cases, it's the tenant or the SMB that has the responsibility to comply, and an MSSP or even a cloud service provider is supporting that, that customer's need to be able to do that. So really didn't want to do much of an advertisement for Schellman. I mentioned, the only firm in the top 100 that does that focuses on cybersecurity and these types of audits and assessments. There's about 300 of us serving over 800 clients, thousands of projects a year. We are, one of the few, or if not only, that can, in a consolidated basis, do SOC, PCI. We're the #2 provider of FedRAMP assessments. We are just about done. We will probably within days, hopefully, be announcing that we are a authorized C3PAO. We were one of the first candidates, C3PAOs for CMMC. And we've gone through our DIPCAC assessment and passed that. And we're just, kind of waiting final documentation from the accreditation body and DoD for clearances, things like that. But we're basically there. And while there's still things to go from a CMMC perspective, there are still things that are required to happen before we can start fully assessing in earnest. We're excited to be one of the first, I think one of the first 5 C3PAOs that'll be authorized to do this work. So other sides of our business are ISO 27001, big practice for us. also some of the complementary 9,001, 20,000. What you're seeing here is a pattern that we focus on the assessment and certification business. We've historically, we haven't done anything with respect to advisory or consulting work. We've focused on being the one-stop shop for companies that have to meet a multiple of requirements. And so, and I won't read through all of this, obviously, Alex, and Philip, you can share this with the viewers after we're done. But this is, this is how intertwined and, and complicated it can be for a managed service provider, an MSSP, to have to look at and determine, okay, what is it that I need to do? What is it that I need to be able to, what is it that I need to be able to comply with in order to meet the needs of my customer? And, there's a few variables for each and every one of these. There's the value, the portfolio companies and my customers, but, there's the value in terms of the segment you're servicing. SOC 2 has become table stakes. We'll mention, I've got just a quick slide to kind of mention that here in a few minutes, but the ISO certification has traditionally been an outside the U.S. market type of endeavor, but it has definitely gained traction within the U.S. markets, in particular for financial services, legal entities, things like that. Privacy GDPR comes into play with any sort of data from customers that exist outside, and in the EU, outside the U.S. and so forth. A variety of issues and concerns that have to happen there. HIPAA high trust, those are two different, HIPAA is the law for healthcare data and management of each PHI. High trust is a certification framework where companies can go and certify and test against healthcare data as well as others. PCI, what it sounds like, payment card information. Anytime you process, transact credit card or have some relationship to that, the PCI DSS comes into place. And then last but not least, obviously, on the federal space, we've been talking about CMMC today, and then you've obviously also got FedRAMP, which is designed for cloud providers as well. So again, we'll share this, of course, but knowing that it can have a lot of these components depends when you're an MSS, an MSP. It depends on what markets you're going after, what customer base you're going after. Again, SOC 2 table stakes, but some of these other things are unique to where the customer may be playing in a particular market. Are they going after federal or DIB work? Are they going after credit card financial transactions and so forth as well? So, Alex, I don't want to revisit. You guys have talked quite a bit about CMMC. You have any guidance for what any particular guidance for what you'd want me to cover in this respect? So, not to put you on the spot, but I can go in a variety of directions on CMMC from an assessor's perspective, or because I know you just saw the last panel was covering quite a bit of it as well. So
yeah, I think without knowing what other slides you have prepared, because I don't want to put you on the spot without any any backup. But yep. I think one of the things that's come up a couple of times, right? We discussed FedRAMP this morning with Matt Travis, the CEO of the AB. Yep. A couple of times we've talked about, what documentation does a business request from an MSP to, get a level of confidence in what they can do and can't do. And then we also talked about the need for something like an underwriter's laboratory, sticker, or what was the old expression? Good housekeeping seal of approval, right? Those kind of stickers you put on an MSP. So maybe talking through a bit of that, taking it from the angle of, hey, I am a small business and I am looking at somebody to help me fill my needs. What do I ask for? What do I look for? Do they have a badge? What documentation do they have? What do I ask for? And then we can even go down the other road. I'm an MSP who wants to serve these people. What do I do? What would be my next steps? What would be a good roadmap for me to wander down?
No, that's fair. That's good perspective. And again, no, throw anything at me. I'm ready. It's yeah. I think we have a somewhat of a unique perspective in the respect that we perform these types of assessments, and even before getting into CMMC, we were doing FedRAMP and still doing FedRAMP. Even some NIST 800 171 work by PKO said, because one was actually audited by the DCMA DIBCAC assessors from DoD against the level 3 environment. And so coming back to your point, they assessed us, our policies, procedures, practice, and they were focused on how we store our audit data. That's the scope of CUI for C3PAOs is the audit reports themselves, right? Those are considered obviously sensitive information. So we developed a secure enclave within the cloud services that we use, within a combination of Amazon and Box and a few others, to be able to do that. I mean, Schellman is about a 300 person organization, but our federal CMMC practice and so forth is obviously much more confined than that. So for all intents and purposes, I'd argue that our federal practice is a small business. I mean, many would argue that 300 person company is relatively small business as well. Where I'm going with this is that we do rely on those cloud services that were provided by Amazon, by AWS, and by Box, for instance, along with security controls from Zscaler and elsewhere that we use to kind of define and protect the environment. And we had to prove all of that to the DCMA DIBCAC auditors. We also, in doing so, and this is where trying to get to the key message here, in doing so, the assessors from DoD looked at what we were doing, and then they also looked at the capabilities from the cloud providers, right? Which we didn't have a traditional MSP. We were using cloud services. But if you look at the Amazons and Boxes of the world, they have customer responsibility matrices. They say, we're signing up to this. You need to sign up for this. And so all of our customer responsibilities, we were audited against in great detail. So they took that customer list and they went through the customer responsibility list, and they said, okay, well, Amazon says that Schellman's responsible for setting up user accounts and configuring password settings and things like that. And they tested us against that. So that's where, as I mentioned from the get-go, the shared responsibility requirements of all of this are critical in understanding, because as part of the assessment process, our role as an assessor is to really bring the two together to understand you have this cloud provider or an MSSP. What are they doing? What are you doing? What evidence do I have to support that you're doing? Because we talk about FedRAMP. So it's like you talked about FedRAMP earlier today, but I mean, FedRAMP has those responsibility matrices. They haven't formally published kind of the inheritance or reciprocity from CMMC to FedRAMP, but I expect it's going to be exactly what I described that we went through with the DoD auditors, is that they're going to look at a FedRAMP authorized environment, and they're going to take those, they're going to say, okay, at a certain level, that environment is good to rely on those controls, but then you have these customer responsibilities that we're going to make sure that you're going to want to adhere to as part of your implementation and using those services. So
yeah, I think that you brought up a lot of stuff in there, and I think there's a couple of things that we probably want to highlight. One is the overall process with CMMC is about eating your own dog food. And I know we're being recorded right now, but if you look at some of the government agencies that have been that have had losses, they've been the victims of some cyber attacks. One of the things that's come out is they didn't even meet their own government standards, and that was, so one of the things I think CMMC is doing is they're forcing people to eat their own dog food. So folks like yourself who are going to be running these assessments, you have to be under the same microscope. The other thing that's recognized, and this is a point that often gets lost, probably the most valuable thing a firm like yours owns is the weaknesses of everybody you've ever assessed, right? Those audit reports. Those audit reports are incredibly valuable to a hacker because you take that and you know where the holes are, right? It's the same reason why when a large financial institution goes through an examination, for those of you not familiar, but in that world, you don't go through an assessment, you go through an examination. So you've heard the term bank examiners. The thing you can't disclose is the results. And a lot of that stuff is done verbally instead of in writing, just because you don't want to get lost, because if the wrong people get that under their hands, it's damaging. So that's important. The other thing that we've highlighted in a couple of ways right now is it seems to me there's going to be a growing importance of FedRAMP, and we just have to figure out that relationship. So if you're a small and medium size, if you're an SME, or you are perfect, you got a slide, I love it. If you're an SMB,
throw them at me, I'm ready. So
there we go. An SMB or an MSP that's looking to provide these services, a good place to look is the FedRAMP catalog. And maybe if you don't see something on there, maybe there's, I'm sure there's a way to highlight it, right? To say, hey, we could really use somebody like the following. One thing I did want to come back to is the customer responsibility matrix. And I come back to this because I'm doing more and more work related to the cloud. And what I'm seeing is a couple of things. Customers don't realize that just because they outsource a piece of their business to a cloud provider, whether it be an MSP, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, all the AASs you're seeing out there, is they still have a responsibility in that. And without picking on anyone, there was a major bank penetration in the past couple of years. They're very well known for their credit cards. And it came down to they had not configured their firewall correctly, even though it was in their matrix. So it's very important to, these customer responsibility matrices are very important in this day and age because we have a shared responsibility model.
Right. So, and you talk about the news. I would be interested if anybody actually had the data, the statistics behind it. But every single time I hear someone on social media saying there was an Amazon breach, or this particular company was breached and they hosted it in the cloud in Amazon or even Azure, but Amazon gets picked on due to their size. But then when a security professional digs into the detail, you find out that this customer purchased the S3 storage service and left it open. So that's not Amazon's fault. That's the customer's responsibility to lock down the systems. Amazon just provides the compute and storage and networking capabilities, right? The customer is responsible for restricting access to this. So every time you see something that makes it that maybe a news article or where something will make it sound like Amazon was hacked, no, it was a misconfigured set of servers. Amazon provides you with the infrastructure. They're not, the customer is responsible for locking it down, for configuring it. And you said in many cases these incidents are occurring in cloud systems due to misconfiguration by the customer. And it's unfortunate, but it accents the need, to your point, that just because you're outsourcing and you're using a cloud, you may be renting someone else's computers and equipment to be able to do what you were otherwise doing, but you still have the same responsibility to make sure those systems are configured and locked down. So,
yeah, it's analogous to buying a car. It's your hands on the steering wheel, your foot on the pedals.
Yep.
When you as the driver gets in an accident, the litigation is between the drivers, not between the auto manufacturers.
That's right. That's right. So.
I would ask the audience if they have any twofold. One is populate the questions, throw out some thoughts. That's always a really good benefit here, because very rarely do you get a senior executive from Schellman answering your questions without some sort of relationship. Take advantage of it. And I would also ask if anybody has any personal experience with some of these reports in the news that Doug is bringing up, I would tend to agree. If you take everything that's in the news, the big three cloud providers would be spending more time chasing incidents than they are actually doing business. So, do agree with you on that. We've only got a few minutes left. Did you want to dwell on this FedRAMP a little more, or are there other slides related to this?
I think we covered, let me see if we got a good question there. Yes, previous panelists, let's see. From what I understand, FedRAMP certification is an arduous task for software companies. True. Does FedRAMP cross over into CMMC requirements? Do you see companies being CMMC first and then FedRAMP? That's a fantastic question. As you see on the slide here, I've kind of got scope bolded. And the difference in understanding is, and I'm sure this was covered in the previous panels, right? CMMC is about where CUI or FCI data are stored within your environment. And that may be a FedRAMP cloud. It may not be a FedRAMP cloud. I mean, we have clients, for instance, that have dedicated federal clouds, FedRAMP authorized, providing services to the federal government. In some cases, some of them have multiple. They may have a high environment that they're servicing some set of customers. They may have a moderate. They may have a DoD. They may have just one. But what becomes interesting with CMMC as well, you can look at it. The path from CMMC to FedRAMP is that's not the way I would accurately state it. Even though you can look at CMMC and there's less controls than there is in FedRAMP, and the 171, the 800-171 standard did in fact come from the 800-53 standard, which is a larger standard. But that's just the controls. The scope is what's more complicated. So in this cases with clients that have FedRAMP cloud environments, sure, it's going to be easier for them to go through CMMC. So I'd probably do the reverse. You have a FedRAMP environment. That environment's probably going to have less to do to meet the CMMC requirements. But the problem is when CMMC starts to creep out, right? You have a technology services company that has a FedRAMP environment, but then they also have a sales engineering team that's sharing network diagrams with customers, with defense contractors and DoD customers and so forth. And then that can bring potentially sensitive information into an area that's not covered by FedRAMP. I mean, FedRAMP is typically production services to federal defense customers directly, right? It's not your internal SharePoint box, et cetera, Google folders that you use to conduct your day-to-day business. And so that's where the scope piece starts to come into play. And the other thing to remember is that CMMC is in fact a maturity model. It is broader. It is more organizational based than to a degree FedRAMP is. FedRAMP, you go after and authorize a specific environment or environments. CMMC, corporate control, the corporate environment, but corporate controls and processes come into place, and then you have to determine where that data exists. So it's just a little different. And so with the clients that we're working with, there is oftentimes you could put it up on a diagram where you'd have a bubble for the FedRAMP environment and a bubble for the CMMC environment, and their edges may cross over it, right? It would be one of those diagrams. That's probably how you would see this occurring in most locations. But you really have to effectively plan, what are the systems that are going to provide services directly to the government? That's FedRAMP. What is the data that, where are our systems and boundary and processes that may handle CUI or FCI? And that's your CMMC. So
cool. Excellent question, Debbie. Sean is throwing out an interesting point. This is something I'm probably going to write down on a piece of paper and stick it on the wall. Controls are a noun to auditors and a verb to technologists.
It's true. That's great. I may have to steal that, Sean. That's a great statement. And CMMC may do a better job of calling them practices. But from an auditor's perspective, controls are things that you do, that the company that we're assessing does in order to meet a particular objective, right? You're trying to secure your systems by enforcing a password policy. That's a control. I actually think CMMC does a better job in articulating them as practices, because they take it a little step up to say a practice is a combination of a technology, of a people process technology type of control. So that's a fair statement. So
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I do like the way CMMC has captured some of the terminologies and use of the word practice. I really do agree with you, because it's not only when you hear control, it's typical. People normally, even though there's 7 categories, people normally think of them as technology based, and by calling them practices, they're institutionalized. No matter how you do that.
And a background check is a control from an auditor's perspective, but I can see why a technologist, wouldn't necessarily see that in the same realm. So
Yep. And by the way, Sean is reacting to our comment, I guess mine, about putting it on a sticky note and you borrowing it. I guess, and he's doing a nod to our earlier speaker from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Sean's putting out that he trademarked the expression already. So
got it.
I don't know if he can do that, and we'll go check. But
well, and you can put that on your sticky note, as long as you're not putting your password on the same sticky note. So
there you go. And draw the little trademark sign around it.
That's right. Yep.
There you go. Hey, one thought to throw out. This comes up a lot when working with companies, and I'd love to get your perspective on it. There are a lot of discrete products sitting out there that there's not a huge volume of government contractors. Like one I ran into is a logistics application. There's a very specific cloud-based logistics application that are used by trucking companies and the like, but it's not so huge that the vendor wants to go for FedRAMP. What do you do in that situation? Because you're using this third-party commercial product, and it's going to hold your CUI, it's core to your business, it's mission critical. What do you do in a situation like that?
I guess it depends kind of on the deployment model for that. Is it cloud or is it on-prem? But I mean, they have said, CMMC has, for the time being, excluded commercial, shrink wrap off the shelf software. Now, if I was assessing a company that was using that software within their environment, I would look to see how it was deployed, how it was configured, what are the access controls around it? Do they, is it inherent, is it using the server security for what it has to do, and so forth as well. So, yep. But it's part of the equation. I can say, I guess we started with, right? Like, as assessors, we have to look at the company as a whole's ability to meet the requirements. And they can't just say, well, if they use a particular software, then we have to make sure that software has the ability to meet the password and the authentication requirements and all of the different things that has to come in there. And if it doesn't, then that creates a problem, right? Or if it's hosted in a cloud service, and if it doesn't have FedRAMP, maybe it doesn't have FedRAMP, that could be okay, but you still have to verify. What FedRAMP does is it allows you to not have to go out and verify all of the individual controls that are in place, because someone else has done some of that work, right? That some of that work has been done and can be leveraged. But if it's going to be more work if that software is cloud hosted, hasn't gone through FedRAMP, it's doable, but it's going to be work as if the company was hosting that software internally, right?
Excellent. Yeah. So it's if you can get something that's FedRAMP certified, it's going to save you a lot of work, because you don't have to go through all that other stuff.
Correct. You worry about the customer responsibilities as opposed to all the things that are the software providers, the cloud providers' responsibilities. Yep. So
excellent. Thank you for your time. I think Phelim is going to kick us off now, because we've stolen 3 minutes from the next guys. Thank you.
Awesome. My pleasure.
Jack and Alex, thanks very much. Please give them a big virtual round of applause. Lovely to see you, and I hope to see you in the audience. Perfect. Thanks, Shalini. Shalini's clapping. I must admit, if you want to chat to everybody, please do select chat to everyone. Otherwise, we're the only ones. And it's cool because we do collect a lot of great comments, and we are very pleased to have them. And May I suggest, of course, some people have been taking screenshots. Can I suggest this MSS CMMC hashtag? Why use it? Well, we can see what you posted, and then we can well, promote it and help it and move it along. We have had an action-packed day today, or at least afternoon today, and it's really a big discussion. Now, what I want to do is invite our final speaker. Of course, we're going to have a little session at the end, but our final speaker to the stage, Uday Ali Pabrai, CEO of ecFirst out of California, great friend of the industry and CMMC, to talk about the ABC of CMMC Fast Facts. Lovely to see you again, Ali. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on here today. And
my pleasure. Well, you have the floor. I'm looking.
Are the slides visible?
Yes, absolutely. It looks great.
Am I visible?
You are indeed, and so am I, but not for long.
Okay, very good. Well, that was a great discussion that we just witnessed. I think to learn more about CMMC, and my presentation over the next few minutes is kind of what are some of the things just from a readiness perspective. You know, as we've been hearing all day, there's a lot of acronyms and new terminology introduced by CMMC. And the one that's probably really relevant is OSC, as we heard earlier today, Organization Seeking Certification. And as we know, there are hundreds of thousands of such organizations just tied into the Department of Defense itself. And in the future, I think all of us would probably agree, other federal government agencies will also be looking at CMMC certification very seriously. It is, as we've heard, and there are a few points that I just wanted to emphasize in my presentation. When I think of CMMC, when we all think of CMMC from the perspective of this particular audience that's on this conference, you know, we think of cybersecurity supply chain. That's the supply chain is obviously the key focus, is to ensure that that's appropriately protected. And again, as a full disclosure, like we saw from the previous speaker, ecFirst, you know, we've been very active, working very closely with the CMMC accreditation body. No shortage of logos and acronyms in this space, but just in terms of disclosure, we are a licensed program provider, LPP, which means that we are developing one of a few companies in the country that's developing official content for CMMC certification training. And we're going to be rolling out, it's taken some time for the exam objective. So those of you that are on today that are looking to, as an individual, right, as an individual, achieve the CMMC credential, the first credential that's being rolled out is called CCP, Certified CMMC Professional, and the exam is going to be public in February, and the certification training programs. We're also an LTP. There's a logo for that somewhere on this page. Yeah, on the right, complete on the right. We're going to be delivering that. It's a 5-day program, 4.5 days actually, practice exam on the last day. So that's something for individuals that are looking to take their career further to think about in terms of adding the CCP credential so that you have, you're positioned, because the other credentials that are going to be introduced in the industry in 2022 are the CCA1 and the CCA3. Those tie into what we've been hearing all day today, maturity level 1 and maturity level 3. Right, so assessors have to complete those certifications in order to be working with C3PAO organizations to perform formal assessment. So we are going to be rolling out the program December 1. We're delivering it virtually, 5-day program, and the only city we are hitting this year in December is Las Vegas. So just wanted to bring that out. And there's more information at the bottom of the screen. If you go to ecfirst.biz CMMC, just in terms of, this is for individuals, not to confuse this with companies looking to achieve CMMC certification. So and these are the 3 credentials that you're going to see in 2022, CCP, CCA1, and CCA3. And that's important because individuals need to have now, a lot of us that are on this conference today have completed the registered professional RP program. That's all online. The next logical step is going to be CCP, and CCP is the only one that's out there. All right, very excited, Ali Pabrai, to be here with you. Again, ecFirst, looking to be very active in, and we have been in the CMMC solution space, both in terms of certification training, but also in terms of enabling organizations to be, especially OSCs, organizations seeking certification, to be as prepared as possible so that before the C3 PAO organization comes in, you know, they are functionally ready to go through the assessment process. So I wanted to emphasize a few points through a lot that we've been hearing today from a practical perspective. And for me, the key word that stands out is readiness. That's what all the organizations need to be looking at. And I would even go a step further. Those of us that are on here today and may not be directly impacted, right? You may not be directly impacted by CMMC. I still think it's a great standard for all of us to learn from, and at the very least, have it influence our cybersecurity program and the capabilities that we are baking into our computing ecosystem. So I want to introduce that. The other thing to note at, and in the previous presentation, we heard about ISO 27001 and HIPAA and high trust and PCI and so many other standards that are out there. I think one of the things that we have to pay attention to when we're looking at these, cybersecurity standards in particular, is what is their core focus, right? What are they looking to protect or secure from an organizational perspective? So, for example, when we think of ISO 27001, the key data type, sensitive confidential information, is the personally identifiable information, or PII. If we look at it from a PCI DSS perspective, and I know we've got many subject matter experts in that here today, that's your cardholder information. And the key acronym that you hear with PCI is CDE, Cardholder Data Environment, right? Now, I'm coming to you today from California, and as you are probably aware, in 2023, right, January 1 of 2023, CCPA, the next version of that, it's already been, approved, and it's going to be effective Jan 1 of 2023. And there, the data type is personal data in terms of California resident personal data. With GDPR, it's going to be European Union personal data. The key point I just want to emphasize is that I think it's very important for organizations to clearly identify and articulate, and many of us struggle with that. What are the different data types that we are required from a regulatory perspective, whether those are global, federal, state, that we have to protect and secure? And in many instances, what you'll find is that, like here, we see it in California, the state requirements in some areas are more stringent than the federal requirements. And your organizational priority from a cyber perspective, cybersecurity and privacy perspective, is to follow the strictest standard. So we need to really be very clear for those of you that are on here and are looking to achieve CMMC certification, is what are the data types that your organization comes into contact with, right? And then based on the maturity levels that we've been hearing about all day today, based on the maturity levels defined within CMMC, where is it that you need to be? So I've got a slide on that, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. What could be more exciting? And then the CMMC model, I want to take a look at that to make sure that we're all on the same page. There's so many different pieces to CMMC that it's important that we keep in context how the different reference documents and the great work that has been done by the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, the CMMC accreditation body. Really, all the players in the CMMC ecosystem should be familiar with understanding what those are. The methodology, now we at ecFirst have developed a methodology to guide organizations to be positioned to prepare for CMMC. And right now, at this point of time, we are a registered provider organization. We are, I think, very close to the C3 PAO getting approval for that. We are probably, from what I understand, a week or two away from that. But everything in the CMMC space has taken longer than any one of us expected. And that is to be expected with this new standard. And then I want to close my presentation with just some recommendations in terms of key next steps. So this is the methodology that I want to get to at the very end in terms of certification. And when we think of certification, I think it's very important to make the distinction. Individuals, professionals, there is a certification path, right? And many of us that are on this, listening in to this presentation today and have been attending this conference are registered professionals, right? That's kind of what's out there for individuals, right? And that's, and then you got the certification that an organization, OSC, has to achieve, right? Which they will be working closely with the C3 PAO. So keep that in mind as we talk about certification. And the only credential in terms of a certification credential for individuals that's kind of out there now, for which the exam will be available, as I mentioned, in February of 2022, is the CCP credential, Certified CMMC Professional. So a couple of things. I know we are all familiar with this, but I wanted to bring my perspective on this. I've been very, I'm a 24/7, 365 kind of guy. This is Disneyland for me. And, to me, it represents the future now. And to me, CMMC represents, we are 2021 today. It represents 2030, because that's kind of where directionally we are headed, right? So I think it's important for everyone to take this certification standard very seriously. Our supply chain in general is at a significant risk. And a lot of that risk, we just don't have enough visibility into. And CMMC is going to force that issue in terms of at least the Department of Defense. And it is a standard, obviously, for future DoD acquisitions. I believe the year is 2025, if I'm not mistaken, 2025. So about 4 more years when all of the acquisitions will have some CMMC certification maturity level requirement tied into it. In my humble opinion, the second bullet from the bottom, it's a standard that cybersecurity professionals, if you're a cybersecurity professional and you're not knowledgeable about the CMMC standard, that's not good. So you gotta, regardless of whether you work with the DoD or not, I just think it's on every cybersecurity professional, in my opinion, to be very familiar with this standard, because there's a lot that you can do with organizations that are not directly impacted by the CMMC standard to improve the quality of your cybersecurity program. Obviously, we know, we've been hearing it throughout the day today, it's migrating to the CMMC framework, the DIB, a lot of acronyms, you've got to be familiar with it. And the beautiful work is they've published a really good, the CMMC accreditation body has published some really terrific references. One of those is the glossary and acronym list. So I think we should all be very familiar with that body of work. So the defense industrial base are those that are directly impacted, and that's a 300,000 plus vendors. But in my opinion, that number is going to be in the millions, because other federal government agencies are very likely to be looking at CMMC very seriously. It is intended to serve as a verification mechanism to ensure appropriate levels of cybersecurity practices and processes. Now, we've heard those terms throughout the presentation today. I just want to re-emphasize that practice and process, fundamental to CMMC terminology and capabilities that organizations need to implement. Now, this is a slide that I think we should pay particular attention to because, like I mentioned, when you think of HIPAA, let's look at some other standards out there to bring context to this slide, but I think this is important. When we think of HIPAA, everything in HIPAA comes down to 3 words: protected health information, right? PHI. When we think of, like I mentioned, PCI DSS, everything comes down to CDE, cardholder data environment, right? When we think of CMMC data types, especially the 2 acronyms that you see at the top, as we've been hearing today, federal contract information, got to be familiar with that data type, that concept in terms of, does an organization come into contact with that information? And then more significant is CUI, controlled unclassified information, that I believe, if memory serves me right, was under the Obama administration back in 2010, when this program was formalized with Executive Order 13556, umbrella term for all unclassified information that requires safeguarding, right? And then you have some additional terms, controlled technical information. So you're going to be hearing about some organizations coming into contact with CTI, covered defense information, CDI, right? Defined as unclassified CTI or other information as described in the CUI registry, and then ECI, export controlled information. Now, the reason I wanted to have a singular slide on the data types is because one of the first things that an organization has to do, assessment comes down the road. Readiness and preparation towards the assessment is really important for the organization seeking certification. And that scoping exercise in terms of trying to understand what's in scope, what's not in scope, what's excluded, what's not in, what is included, what's excluded, etc. And then what are the data types that your organization comes into contact with? If you only come into contact with FCI, as we've heard today, then you got to be looking at maturity level 1. But if you do come into contact with CUI, then depending on a variety of other factors, then the entry point for that is maturity level 3. So this is a graphic that is directly from one of the CMMC reference materials, but I think it's a classic. It's one that everyone should be familiar with. And the key thing I wanted to bring out in this graphic, I love numbers. And I think we should be familiar with the context of these important terms with the CMMC model. So we've got domains. Everything is organized into domains. Now in 171 that we've heard a lot about today, you got 14 domains, but there are 3 additional domains that have been introduced as a consequence of the CMMC model. And so they're a total of 17. That's how it's organized. So I think understanding when we try to understand a new standard, we got to understand what's the focus of that standard, right? So those data types, that's very important. The other thing is that how is the standard organized? That's where this slide is really important. So the previous slide and this slide, to me, are fundamental to anyone looking to really get the fundamentals in place in terms of core concepts related to CMMC. 17 domains. Now, that's organized into capabilities. Capabilities consist of practices, and there are a total of, I believe, 171 practices. So if you're going to be required by the DoD, to be at maturity level 5, then you got to demonstrate that you're meeting the requirements of the 171 practices, right? And that's a lot. There's a lot there. And then there are 5 processes, a total of 5 processes that have been defined. And the number of capabilities, there are 43 capabilities. So these numbers are, just in terms of context, 17 domains, 43 capabilities, 171 practices, 5 processes, right? Gotta keep that. And then the maturity levels, right? Because everything is tied into maturity levels, and there are 5 maturity levels. Now that's another key graphic that is in the CMMC reference materials, and you have to look at it from the bottom up, right? And so most organizations, most of the customers and clients and all of that are going to be required to be at maturity level 1, right? So maturity level 1 is where you're going to see most of the DIB, the defense industrial base, looking to get certified. And then level 2 is regarded as the transitional level. And then there'll be a good percentage of organizations that will be required to be at maturity level 3. So for me, I like to keep things simple. Life is too complicated and complex, right? And so when I think of maturity level 1, that means this organization is processing FCI. When I think of maturity level 3, well, that's the entry point for CUI. You're coming into contact with CUI. Those are the requirements. And like you heard, 130 practices and 3 processes, right? Now, beyond maturity level 3, when you look at 4 and 5, here we're looking at APT, advanced persistent threats, right? And so that's where, there's additional information. There may be CTI that your organization is coming into contact with. And again, that's going to be spelled out in the DoD contract. So 5 levels, 3 acronyms, FCI, maturity level 1, CUI, maturity level 3. And if there's APT risk, then you're looking at maturity levels 4 and 5. Is everyone excited? Am I the only guy on fire here? Okay, just kidding. All right, now 17 domains, we've heard about it again today, but the 3 new ones beyond 14 introduced, going beyond 800, 171 in terms of NIST body of work. So that's domain number 2, asset management, number 12, recovery. And then one of my favorites is number 15, situational awareness, which for those of you, we've got a lot of expertise on this conference today, is related to the area of cyber threat intelligence, also known as CTI. So there's a lot of valuable information in terms of situational awareness. And so I think organizations can, when you're looking at 2022, because I think all of us that are on here today, we're already starting to think about the cybersecurity program for our organization and the vendors that we work with in terms of where do we want to see our program and the program of our third-party vendors. And I think domain 15 is a tremendous reference for things to think about for 2022. So current version is 1.02. That's the latest version. You can download it. And we are expecting an update to that probably in the first quarter of 2022. So keep an eye out for that. And then, the graphic that you see on the left-hand side, I think before, my advice to anyone, before they do anything with assessments or whatever else has to be done with CMMC, acquire the knowledge. Understand the standard and make sure all of the stakeholders have the same baseline knowledge. And that's why we put knowledge in as step number 1, right? You should be conducting executive briefs and workshops to make sure that all of those individuals, the key roles that are going to be involved, the stakeholders, departments that are going to be involved in this journey to achieve. It's not going to be a journey to achieve in days or weeks, right? It takes sustained effort, right? On the part of the RPO or C3PO organization, as well as the OSC, it's got to be a collaboration. Scoping, very important to clearly define that. Everyone's got to be on the same page, what's included, what's not included, all of that. The assessment exercise, plan, policy, procedure, your system security plans, your policies, procedures, implementation evidence in terms of remediation, readiness, and then finally going through the assessment process for the certification. And at the end of the day, I think the 2 words, when I think of 2022 in terms of kind of wrapping up my presentation and just something to think about strategically from an executive perspective, it's all about cyber resilience, right? So when we strategically think about cybersecurity and the challenges that we face with ransomware and all the other types of attacks that we're going to continue to see in 2022, we got to make our environment more resilient. So cyber resilience is what, to me, the maturity levels provide a roadmap, if you will, for organizations to achieve that capability. And then the Japanese word, which I think we're all familiar with, Kaizen, continuous improvement, right? So I think another advice that I would share, I give advice and it's like the situation at home. Wife and kids don't listen. No one listens anymore. But I think CMMC provides an excellent roadmap for organizations to think proactively over a longer period of time in the future, 12, 24 months. So, maybe by the second quarter of next year, you want to formally achieve maturity level 1, and maybe 6 months after that, maturity level 3. So you got to make sure that you've got your understanding the standard and applying that to determine what is going to be working best for your organization. So I know I've got about 60 seconds left here. Wanted to summarize some key things that we've been talking about. On the left side, you'll see on the numbers, I've also put together 2 documents. One is an infographic. I put these together and no one reads it. I'm very excited about it. But yeah, if you send me an email, I'll be happy to share the infographic with you. And then I've also got a really good document I put together, the art of achieving CMMC certification, and would be happy to share that as well. Kind of just general information for organizations seeking certification about what are some of the things they got to keep in perspective. So here are my email address, ali.pabrai@ecfirst.com. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn as well. I hope to hear about you over LinkedIn. And I cannot thank my friend, I think we are friends, Philip, who's always been so humble and kind, and he brings all of us together. We're all running in 18 different directions, and he kind of brings us all together, which is not easy to do.
Ali, that's too kind. Thank you very much, and thank you for such a great and impassioned presentation. You say, who's excited? Well, I was excited, and I think it brings it all to life. And I'm glad we had you here at this segment, because in a way, what we're doing is we're bringing it together and saying, now what? Like there's a lot of oh dear, a lot of we will, and then now what? And that now what involves training, and it involves assessments, which you're running. And you said you're going to even be in person in Vegas. That sounds really good.
Vegas, I'm going to be teaching the 5-day CCP class in Vegas, and trust me, I won't be drinking. I may be drinking at the end of day 5, but not the first 4 days. But I hope to see some of you in Vegas, and I think it'll be exciting. It'll be the first program we are rolling out for CMMC certification.
Yeah, it's an exciting time, and then lots of things coming back to Vegas. Actually, they've been live now for some time, haven't they? But yeah, that's really good. Debbie says very helpful information, Ali. Thank you. So that's really
and I want to tell everyone, control your excitement.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, what's next for you beyond your training courses? Because I know you run an MSP as well in California. So what's happening there?
I think the key thing is we've put together a CMMC portal to help organizations, kind of organize their policies, their procedures, the documents, the system security plans. There's a lot that has to do with that, and then really that becomes critical as the MSPs are looking to help their customers and their clients better understand and navigate the journey to achieve CMMC certification. So we've also, on the outside of the training certification, on the consulting side, I think our focus right now is on readiness, helping organizations prepare so that they've got all those pieces in place.
I like it. Yeah, getting people ready, and I feel that, if anything, this is a good shot at getting security done in the States. I know no one likes federal things regulatory wise, but this could be the thing. Wonderful. All right. Well, Ali, thanks very much for your time. Let's give you a big virtual round of applause. Sean is already clapping, says good info, Ali, and we look forward to seeing you in the audience for the wrap up.
Thank you so much. Thank you. You guys control yourself. Don't be drinking yet.
Not yet. All right. See you soon. See you. Like it. So very interesting. Well, let's bring back my fellow co-host Alex to do our wrap up, because we've had a lot of interesting sessions. I sense today's session was not too long. Just perhaps the right length, Alex. What do you think?
You mean the entire starting at 12 noon?
Yeah.
I think that there was a lot of energy and a lot of interest, and clearly a couple of the panels could have kept going. So I think it was a good block of time, but it wasn't complete. So we're probably going to need to follow up, maybe a couple of, some that are more specific instead of redoing the same one.
Yeah, I like that. And of course, these sessions, they are more discursive, they are more involved, they are more interactive. And as you said, even before with Doug, you said, hey, how often do you get someone like Doug right in front of you?
Well, when you look at it, when you think about it, we had the CEO of the accreditation body. right?
Who's former deputy CISO?
Yep, yep. No lightweight, no matter how you measure that. We had a director from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Okay. We had managing principal from Schellman. We had great panelists. How often do you get to speak to those people, let alone in one place within a defined period of time that will basically ask any question you have to ask and never send you a bill?
There you go. And that's why these are community, type events, because it's genuinely all right. So community, now what should we do? Now what are we going to do? As opposed to, hey, oh yeah, I guess people can make money out of CMMC. People will make money out of it, right? But this event is not so much about that, and much more about this is going to hurt a lot of small businesses. How do we alleviate the pain?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it. I think one is there's a lot of passion in what everybody's talking about, right? Because if you notice, everybody who spoke, everybody who engaged, especially Ali, there was a lot of energy. So this is an area that people are excited about, and frankly, you don't get that level of excitement when it's only about money. You just don't. Maybe for short periods of time, but not for long periods of time, and they're not as willing to give away so much free consulting, advice, information, and the like, right? So there was a lot there, and it's very clear from everybody who participated that these small businesses are going to need a different level of attention. Not saying the standard would be lowered, but they're going to need a different type of structure to help them get there, whether that becomes special programs, whether, whatever form it takes. It's going to require a different level because we want them to innovate. We want them to be important as part of the DIB and play the role they're playing, if not in a larger role. We just want to make sure it's done in a way that we don't give up the farm to the people who hate us and want to do us ill.
Yeah, and absolutely. And on that point, there were a few comments in the audience, like, why now? Or why not before? Or is it like some people are just waking up to this? And, I don't know. I'm gonna stick my neck out. I'm gonna say that maybe some people for a long time have said, look at this threat actor, they're stealing lots of things. And maybe governmental actors have said, no, I'm looking at that threat actor. I'm still thinking about that one. And maybe there's been a switch in policy, a switch in direction, and have gone, oh yeah, they're stealing lots of stuff. And obviously I'm being circumspect with who these people are, but I get the feeling that there's been a bit of a switch. What do you think, Alex?
Well, I think two things. One is the level of awareness has definitely increased, right? We're seeing that, and I hate to say it, but ransomware has done a lot to help us with that, right? So it is what it is. But at the same time, government a number of years ago made a decision to allow self-attestation based on 853 and 800-171. And we're finding it just doesn't work. Right? So there's something to be said there. Now, you can talk about why it doesn't work, and you can have a different level of criticism or lack of empathy, however you want to look at it. But the reality is, we as humans, we lose objectivity. We just lose objectivity. And we have a finite set of disciplines we're good at. So a business owner, especially a small one that doesn't have a lot of resources, could easily be looking at 853 or 800-171 and go, yeah, I do this. Check, 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 check. And they think it's right. But because they don't have the expanded level of expertise, they just don't understand the full breadth of what's being asked for. The other side is losing objectivity. How many times have each of us on this call written something and then find out somebody else reads it totally different? When we look at it, it says exactly what we thought it said. right? But not to somebody else. And I think that's what happens a lot of times when we put our security controls and develop our security posture. Looking at it from the outside, the inside out, not the outside in.
So where do you think this leaves the MSP of the future? Because we're forever there is a debate on Twitter and LinkedIn and all that saying if you're a pure play MSS, then you look down on MSPs that wake up one morning and say that they're an MSS, because how could they possibly be? They're too small. They're too inexperienced. But in actual fact, isn't CMMC going to turn them into an MSS of sorts, whether the big pure play MSS players like it or not? I think this will have a big effect on that.
There's definitely a lot of market dynamics at play. How they're going to actually shake out, I'm not really sure. But I would like to think that the MSPs that get their cyber hygiene in place and get their act together, through the third-party attestations that Doug was talking about before, or get, whatever specific certifications they may get, like FedRAMP and the like, that becomes a competitive advantage for them. It really does. And I don't want to go out on a limb, but over the past bunch of years, I've run into a fair number of service providers that only have a handful of clients and they run it out of their basement or out of the garage. There's a risk there, right? So incenting those folks to take their cyber hygiene up a notch will, by definition, take up the cyber hygiene. They'll raise the cyber hygiene of their clients, or maybe they just should never have been in that business to begin with. I know that's a hard statement to make, but that might be the case. It's just like members of the DIB. Maybe there's going to be a shakeout in the DIB, and maybe it's not economically viable for certain players to remain in the DIB.
Well, this is the age-old thing, isn't it? Nobody wants regulation until you're a very large company who could take lots of really big hits, and then they go, yes, absolutely, we want lots of regulation that costs millions of dollars, because it will completely wipe out all of the small players. But conversely, there are lots of people who used to be selling ice cream, and then they wake up one morning and say, oh, that Alex fellow, he talks about IT. Oh yeah, I mean, I'm going to get into that. And maybe that's not the best approach to start. And of course, the American dream of starting off in the garage and, making it bigger, you don't want to quash that.
No, but let's go back a second. Now, I do a fair amount of governance work, which the new term for that is, cybersecurity and governance is called cyber governance. So remember what regulations and this type of governance is about. It's about systemic risk. It's about protecting a community, not protecting an individual business.
Eddie from the audience, I'm hoping he's giving true testimony, because this is a great thing if true. He says he owned 6 ice cream shops before getting into cybersecurity. I hope you really did, Eddie, because that'll make a great story. It's true. Okay, very good. So
I love it.
I love it.
Let me give you an analogy down the food service thing. I'm trying to remember the exact details of it, but it was like 100 and not that long ago in human activity that we didn't have regulations around our food service, and there was no food standards. So most people died of things like dysentery. Now I think everybody on this call probably likes the idea that there's some regulation and some control over the quality of food we eat. Right? Privacy and security are often talked about as two separate things. I think they're two sides of the same coin. Because a lot of the controls and discipline you use for one makes you better at the other. You just got to look at it that way. So these kind of regulations and all, or standards and these frameworks with these third-party attestations and having third-party assessments is just going to up the game, and it should make each one of us more confident and less concerned, so we can focus more on innovation or taking care of our families, or what have you, instead of having to worry about the safety. Brakes on a car, there's standards on what a brake on a car must do. How many of us give a thought to that when we're driving? We don't.
Yeah, it shunted out all the small brake manufacturers that couldn't make brakes actually work.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it might end some of the romance of set. I don't know if setting up an MSP is ever romantic, but it might get out some of the romance of that. But overall, I think it'll be good. And you only have to look at. Here's an example. November, IT Nation, right? It's back and it's big, right? And 5 years ago, nobody in the security space would go to IT Nation. They say, oh, that's an installer distributor MSP type event. And conversely, nobody from IT Nation would go to any of the cyber events because they're like, what do I need to know about that? I don't want to open myself up to the question of how secure I am. I'm okay about backup, but I'm not going to be talking about security. And then at least for the last 5 years when I've been doing this type of event, wow, has it become more popular. So
I love it.
Yeah. And we get to go to each other's events, which is always good because that means more events. And as you might tell, I'm a bit of a fan of events. I like going to them. So
very cool.
So what's next for you, Alex? What are you helping companies do, especially with regards to CMMC?
Well, there's a lot going on. So I would love the audience to chime in about what other activities they have as well in this space, or what kind of things they would like to see happen. I think I mentioned it while talking to Matt this morning. I'm actually in the process of completing my provisional assessor, provisional instructor. I was selected to be one of the first tranche, and they're doing a lot of work. The AB has done a lot of work to make that more of a profession and a serious certification than just a check mark. So there's a lot of work around that. I have a couple companies I'm working with to help them identify their CUI and how to properly document that. I'm working with one company around getting all the policies and procedures in place, and also their cloud strategy about how to use the shared services model. Plus, I'm part of a couple industry forums. One in particular I'll put out there. It's run by grf.org. It's about operational resilience. We're working very heavily. We're using the Cloud Security Alliance. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but that has a lot of work around the shared security controls and how do you assess the security posture of a third party when you're gonna leverage them in the ways we're talking about now. So I would love to hear from the folks that have stayed with us all day about the things that they would like to see happen. Maybe additional topics, maybe some additional panels. There was lots of really good nuggets thrown out throughout the day that we could just pick up and run with. And I'd love to see what the attendees have to say.
I'll write that in the chat as well. And because here we go. Sean says, how should an SMB baseline where they are today to start down the road to improve their cyber hygiene without engaging a consultant? Are there tools that companies can use on their own? I'll put that to you, Alex, because I'm not qualified to answer it.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate that. My personal opinion is I'm trying to think how to. I have an expression I use on this sort of stuff, and I'm just going to throw it out there. The best tool I have in my toolbox, my checkbook is the best tool I have in my toolbox. So if I don't have the staff or the internal expertise, I think it's far better to hire it, rent it, however you want to look at it, than it is to try to fake it before you make it. So if you have a limited staff, limited expertise, I would definitely look at using third parties. And if you're going to use a third party, I would only select somebody from the marketplace, CMMCAB.org. They have a thing called the marketplace. And in the marketplace, it shows you who is allowed to do this stuff and who is not. So I would absolutely not hire anybody that is not in that marketplace. So you've probably seen on my stuff throughout the day, I got this little badge here. You'll see people, they have those badges. And according to the AB, anybody who puts that badge has to have a slot in the marketplace. And that means you are certified to do this work. The second thing to think about is if you want to do it in-house, that's great. Remember, you're going to come under the scrutiny of a third party, an unbiased third party who's going to look at what you've got. And that unbiased third party, that objective read, is going to be done on a pass-fail basis, right? So there is no, oh, you didn't do this good enough, I'll pass you contingent on this. That's not the way the CMMC certification process works, at least now. Well, there's certain very minor exceptions, which are meaningless. I don't want to say meaningless, but no, if you're not certified, it's either you are or you aren't, and you're going to have to pay for that. It would be much more cost effective to hire somebody who knows what they're doing to help you now, that's an unbiased third party, than run the risk of having this unbiased third party come in, assess you, only to have to remediate and then get reassessed. In the long run, it should save you money, and you have much lower risk if you go with somebody from the marketplace we have there. So Sean, thanks for asking the tough questions. I'll put a little plug in. Sean and a couple people we had on the panels today, I'd recommend every one of them.
I had a question for you then, Alex, because I can see in the audience we've actually got my friend Jay Martin, who's from the physical security world. It occurs to me that CMMC is about to hit maybe the corporate security, physical security world in a way that they really hadn't expected, because until now, the answer to everything cyber has really been, yeah, go ask the IT people, or I like dark web threat intel because it tells me something about what I'm doing. But other than that, go ask the IT people. This seems like it's going to smack physical security and all sorts of other people in the face.
Yeah. So a couple of things. Remember, at least in one, if not two of the presentations, we talked about the different domains in CMMC. One of them is physical, right? So it's not totally, they're not disparate pieces. The physical part is there. Now, what has changed is if you look at the evolution of the security posture of enterprises, it started out where basically we put everything behind walls. We had guards, guard dogs, bullets, razor wire, all this, and all the IT stuff was on the inside. But now, especially post-COVID, we have people working in their homes. So the way we look at physical security is very different than it was. So physical is not going away. It's got a different dimension. The other side that we have is there's a lot of penetrations happening through areas we never thought of before. So for example, Target, I'm trying to remember when it was, Target was hit with an attack that came through its HVAC vendor.
Yeah.
Right. By the way, I say this a lot of times. Target is always getting hit in obscure ways. I guess Target is a target, right? They're the ones who get through the HVAC vendor. They're the one that credit card scanner at the register was hacked. It was a very specific attack around a specific model that only existed at Target. There's been a half dozen situations like that. Target is a target, I guess.
Yeah, it's yeah, don't want to comment, but yes, yeah, the name. But yeah, so I like those domains because it brings it home. Do you think, though, in all honesty, we had an enormous amount of hype about GDPR, and yes, GDPR could really come and hit you if you fall foul of it. But there was a bell curve of hype, and now we're sort of, I don't know, we're in a more realistic phase in a way. Do you think that's going to happen with CMMC? We're going to have a massive hype, everyone's fearful, and then people will realize, well, you know what? A lot of this is in NIST 800-171. A lot of this is common sense.
The short answer is yes. I think one of the things that we have is that unfortunately the US government in the past has put stuff out there, then backed off of it. Right? So I know there's a number of organizations I've talked to are going to go, well, I'll wait till they get real. And I think that's going to put them in a very, that's going to put them behind the curve. Now, the AB is actively building the ecosystem. They're growing the demand around the ability to do these assessments, to process these assessments, right? So Ali talked about before about the training classes that they're offering and the pace. That it's going to go like this, and as soon as it starts going like that, and the government comes out with its next couple of rounds of final directives, it's going to become real. And I suspect when people start receiving RFPs when contracts get awarded that demand it, they're going to wake up really quickly. Thought I will leave you with. All of the big contractors, all of the big defense contractors have jumped on this, and they're already starting the remediation in a very big way. The only place I hear reluctance is the folks that are further down the chain. And I'm not exactly sure why, but the big boys are investing heavily. They know it's coming. They know it's real.
That is perhaps a great place for us to finish on. We have to draw a line under it somewhere. But yeah, I've really had a great time. Let's give all panelists and speakers today a big round of applause. I love that applause button. Thank you, the audience, for still being here. We have some fantastic people still all the way at the end. Just a few shout outs. Dave, Debbie, Eddie, Philippe, Jay, Kyle, Michael, Sean, Simon, Stanley, Stephen. Nice to have you in the audience at the very, very end. So you should give yourselves a clap for staying and being such great participants. Thanks, Eddie, as well. All right, from Alex and myself, this has been a great learning curve, not just for us, but for the MSS series, I think, as well. Thanks very much, and have a good weekend.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you again. Don't forget to reach out. You want anything, questions, comments, thoughts, whatever, please connect.
Do you want to put your email in the chat, Alex?
Sure.
There you go. It's in the chat. When I end the session, it will disappear from the chat. So
wait a minute. I think I put it in hosts and panelists.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There we go. Fantastic. So yeah, copy Alex's address down. Reach out, get advice. When I close the session, which will be very, very soon, that email address will disappear. But of course, LinkedIn is also a great way to reach out. Thanks ever so much. Have a great weekend, and I've really learned a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Really enjoyed it.